My son banned me from his wedding and then had the audacity to send me the bill. A bill for $390,000 for a party I wasn't allowed to attend. His fiancée wrote a little note telling me to be thankful they were letting me contribute. I just smiled. They had mistaken my silence for weakness. They were about to learn that the same hands that built our family's fortune could also sign the demolition order. Before I tell you how I turned their dream wedding into a public nightmare, let me know where you're watching from in the comments and be sure to like and subscribe because you won't want to miss how this ends. At 75 years old, you learn to find comfort in simple things. For me, it is the whisper of a sharp hand plane across a plank of cedar. That soft, rhythmic hiss is the only music in my workshop, a sanctuary my wife Sarah and I built together 4 decades ago. Every tool on the wall, every scar on the workbench tells a story. And most of those stories have her in them. The silence has been heavier since she passed 3 years back, but the smell of cedar never changes. It smells like beginnings. I was finishing a small box, a replica of the first jewelry case I ever made for her. It wasn't for anyone in particular. It was just a way to keep my hands busy, to quiet my mind. I ran my palm along the smooth grain, feeling its warmth. It is in these moments I feel closest to her. The piece was broken by the squeal of the mail truck's brakes out on the street. A normal sound, but today it felt harsh, out of place. I wasn't expecting anything. The bills are on autopay. The junk mail gets tossed. I sighed, setting my plane down and wiping my hands on my worn leather apron. Probably another tool catalog. I walked outside, the midday Atlanta sun making me squint. The mail carrier, a young man I hadn't seen before, handed me a digital clipboard to sign before passing over a thin white cardboard mailer. It felt strangely formal. The words Priority Express were stamped in bold red ink. "Have a good one, Mr. Blackwood," he said, already heading back to his truck. I stood there for a moment, holding the package. It was light, almost weightless. There was no return address, just my name and home printed in a sharp, modern font. A knot of unease tightened in my gut. It was the same feeling I got when a subcontractor told me everything's fine, while his eyes darted away. Back in the workshop, I placed the mailer on my workbench right next to the unfinished cedar box. The contrast was stark. One a thing made by hand with love, the other something cold and impersonal. I took my utility knife and sliced cleanly through the tape. Inside it was not a letter. It was a 20-page document, spiral-bound in plastic like a corporate presentation. The cover page was glossy, the text printed in a flawless professional script. Wedding and honeymoon expense proposal. Marcus Blackwood and Brittany Cunningham. My heart skipped. I hadn't even received an invitation yet. Marcus had said they were being sent out next week. Maybe this was my son's way of including me in the details. Maybe he wanted my input on the planning. A small flame of hope flickered in my chest. I had been worried about Brittany's influence on him. Maybe I was wrong. I turned to the first page. It was titled Cost Summary. My eyes scanned the first line. Wedding venue, the Serafina Gardens. Platinum package, $120,000. I blinked, reading it again. It had to be a typo. But the next line was just as staggering. Catering and beverages for 300 guests, $75,000. My breath caught in my throat. Flowers and decor, $45,000. Photographer and videographer, a film crew from New York, $30,000. Custom designer, attire and rings, $50,000. The numbers started to blur, each one more absurd than the last. I felt a growing sense of detachment, as if I were reading about the lives of strangers from a gossip magazine. This couldn't be my son. My Marcus. The boy who was so proud of his first $10 an hour summer job working for my construction crew. My gaze drifted down the page past a $25,000 line item for a band until it landed on the final entry. Honeymoon. A 3-week stay in an overwater villa in Bora Bora. $45,000. My eyes went to the bottom of the page, to the final figure, the one printed in bold and underlined for emphasis. Grand total, $390,000. The air was sucked from my lungs. $390,000. Sarah and I hadn't made that much in our first 10 years of business combined. It was an impossible number, a figure from another universe. It was an insult to a lifetime of hard work. As I stared, a small piece of cream-colored cardstock slipped from between the pages and fluttered onto the sawdust-covered floor. I bent down slowly, my joints creaking in protest. It was a handwritten note. The looping, ostentatious script belonged to Brittany. Mr. Blackwood, it began. Since you won't be attending the wedding, we thought this would be the best way for you to contribute. Please consider this your gift to our happiness. We know you'll want to do the right thing. Best Brittany, since you won't be attending." The words echoed in the sudden ringing silence of my workshop. My hands began to shake. Not from age. It was a tremor that started deep in my chest. I had been banned. Not with a phone call. Not with a conversation. Just a cold, dismissive line and a note attached to an invoice. I collapsed onto my stool, the proposal slipping from my grasp, its slick pages fanning out across the floor. Each expense item seemed to mock me. The Serafina Gardens. A film crew from New York. Bora Bora. This wasn't my world. This was Brittany's world, and she was sending me the bill for admission. The foolish hope I'd felt just moments before curdled into a bitter taste in my mouth. This was no misunderstanding. This was a message. A calculated, professionally presented message. It said, "Your only value to us is your checkbook. Pay up and stay away." I closed my eyes trying to breathe, but the air in my workshop suddenly smelled like ashes. I had to call him. I had to hear it from his own mouth. A part of me, a foolish, desperate part, clung to the hope that Brittany had done this without his knowledge. That my son, the boy I taught to ride a bike and bait a fishing hook, could not be this person. My old phone felt heavy in my hand. My fingers felt stiff and clumsy as I scrolled to his name. It rang 3 times before he answered, his voice clipped and annoyed. "Dad, what's up? I'm kind of busy right now." I kept my own voice steady level. "Marcus, I just received a package." There was a telling pause on the other end of the line. "Oh, that," he said, and his tone shifted to defensive. "Look, I was going to call you. Am I banned from my own son's wedding, Marcus?" I asked, the words feeling like shards of glass in my mouth. I heard a faint shuffling sound, a muffled whisper, and then another voice, sharp and clear, joined the call. It was Brittany. I was on speakerphone. "We're not banning you, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "We are simply having a more intimate event. You know, with our friends. A different generation." "A different generation," I repeated silently, the phrase tasting like poison. "And this invoice for $390,000. "That's what it costs," Marcus mumbled as if reading from a script. "That's what it takes to have a decent wedding in Atlanta these days. We're just making it easier for you to fulfill your parental duty." Brittany's voice cut in, laced with a brazen confidence that stole my breath. "Frankly, you should be thankful we're letting you contribute at all." Contribute. The word hung in the air between us. The tremor in my chest stilled, replaced by something cold and heavy, like a block of concrete setting in my veins. The last ember of hope was extinguished. "I see," I said, and my voice was a stranger's. "Good," Brittany chirped. "We'll send over the account information for the wire transfer. Thanks in advance." And they hung up. I sat there in the silence of my workshop, the dead phone still pressed to my ear. The sadness was gone, swallowed by a profound and terrifying emptiness. The son I knew was gone. He had been replaced by a stranger on a speakerphone, a man who measured his father's love in dollars and cents and found it wanting. My gaze drifted from the cold, impersonal invoice to a framed photograph on the wall, its edges softened by a thin layer of sawdust. It was my favorite picture of Sarah. She was standing in the half-finished frame of this very workshop, her hair tied up in a bandana, a smudge of dirt on her cheek, and a hammer held loosely in her hand. She was laughing, a full-throated laugh that could make the birds outside stop and listen. We were 30 years old, knee-deep in debt, and working 16-hour days to get Blackwood Construction off the ground. We had nothing but a second-hand truck and a shared, stubborn dream. I remembered that day so clearly. A potential client had just turned us down for a big job, telling me I was too ambitious for my own good. I came back to our small apartment defeated, ready to give up. Sarah didn't say a word. She just grabbed my hand, pulled me to the car, and drove us to this empty lot we had been saving for. "We'll build it ourselves first," she said, her eyes shining with a fierce light that always chased away my shadows. "We'll build our own headquarters, our own home, and we'll show them all what ambition looks like." That was Sarah. She wasn't just my wife. She was the architect of our life. I was the builder, the one who knew how to frame a wall and pour a foundation, but she was the one with the blueprint. She saw the finished house when all I could see was a pile of lumber. She was the one who went to the bank time and time again, refusing to take no for an answer. She faced down suppliers who tried to sell us substandard materials and charmed city inspectors who were known for being tough as nails. "Our name is on this, Silas," she would always say, running her hand over a freshly laid beam. "It has to mean something. It has to mean quality. It has to mean integrity." When Marcus was born, that purpose solidified into a legacy. Every late night, every sacrificed weekend was for him. We weren't just building houses, we were building his future. I remembered bringing him to job sites when he was just a little boy, his eyes wide with wonder at the towering cranes. I gave him his first hammer, a small one with his initial burned into the handle. Sarah would pack our lunches and we'd eat sitting on stacks of drywall, her telling Marcus stories about how every building starts with a single solid stone. "This is all for you one day," she told him, her voice soft but firm. "Not just the company, but the lesson behind it, the knowledge that you can build anything you want in this world, as long as you're willing to work for it with your own two hands." We never just gave him things. Everything was earned. His first car was a 10-year-old pickup he had to help me restore. His college tuition was paid for, but his spending money came from summers spent working with my crews, doing the dirtiest jobs, learning the business from the ground up. Or so I thought. Looking at the invoice again, the one demanding a sum that could fund a dozen college educations, I felt a wave of nausea. Where was the lesson in this? Where was the integrity? We had spent our lives teaching our son the value of $1, and he had turned around and presented our love as a bill for nearly 500,000 of them. A bitter realization settled upon me. We had given him the tools, but he had chosen to sell them for parts. He didn't want to build his own life. He wanted to purchase a prefabricated one assembled by others, and he expected me to foot the bill. He wanted the prestige of the Blackwood name without understanding the sweat and sacrifice that gave it weight. Sarah would have been heartbroken, but she wouldn't have just cried. Oh no. After the heartbreak would have come the fire. The same fire I saw in her eyes on that empty lot all those years ago. She would have seen this not just as an insult to me, but as a desecration of everything we stood for. She would have seen it as her duty to protect our legacy from the very person it was meant for. And as I stood there surrounded by the ghosts of our shared labor, I felt her presence beside me. I felt her strength flowing into me. This was no longer just about my wounded pride. This was about honoring her memory. This was about protecting the foundation of our life's work. Marcus and his fiancée saw me as a bank. They were about to find out I was the builder. And the first rule of building is that you must have a solid plan before you ever break ground. My plan was just beginning to take shape. The memories of Sarah, once a warm comfort, now felt like embers stirring a fire within me. The pain of my son's betrayal was a sharp physical thing, an ache in my bones that felt deeper than any grief I had known. But as I stood there in the quiet hum of the workshop, something began to shift. The heat of that pain was not consuming me. It was forging something new in its place. Resolve. Cold, hard, and sharp as steel. I reached down and picked up the glossy proposal from the workbench. My hands were steady now. I was no longer looking at it with a father's wounded heart. I was looking at it with the eyes of the man who had built Blackwood & Sons from nothing. I was looking at it like a set of blueprints from a rival contractor searching for the structural flaws. And they were everywhere. I forced myself to read it again line by line, but this time I wasn't seeing the insults. I was seeing the data. $120,000 for a venue, $75,000 for catering, $45,000 for flowers. They didn't see these as costs. They saw them as symbols. They weren't planning a marriage. They were staging a theatrical production to announce their arrival into a world they felt they deserved. They had written a script where I was cast in a single silent role, the financier. They had handed me an invoice expecting one of two reactions. They either expected me to fight, to yell, to argue about the cost, which would allow them to paint me as a bitter old man standing in the way of their happiness. Or they expected me to fold, to grieve, to write the check with a trembling hand, a defeated father buying a ticket to his own irrelevance. They had prepared for an emotional response. What they had not prepared for was a strategic one. They had made a fundamental mistake. They thought this was a family matter. I was going to treat it as a business transaction. This wasn't an invoice from my son. This was a hostile takeover bid for my legacy submitted by an amateur partnership, and any bid can be countered. A strange calm settled over me. The emotional storm had passed, leaving behind a quiet, crystalline clarity. They wanted $390,000. Fine. The number was no longer an insult. It was a tool. It was the price they had put on their own downfall. I would give them exactly what they asked for. I would finance their dream. I would build them the most beautiful, elaborate, and flimsy stage imaginable. And at the moment of their triumph, when the lights were brightest and the audience was watching, I would pull the lever that sent the whole thing crashing down around them. My love for my son had been their target. They thought it was my weakness. They were about to learn that love, when betrayed, can become a force of nature. It doesn't just disappear. It transforms. It can become a fortress impenetrable and absolute. My grief for Sarah had made me vulnerable, had made me soft. But now the memory of her strength was my armor. This wasn't just about my money or my pride anymore. This was about the name we had built, the values we had cherished. This was about the foundation. Sarah had been right all along. A house is only as strong as its foundation. And the one my son was trying to build was a house of cards resting on quicksand. I wasn't just going to refuse to build it. I was going to expose the rot in its core for the entire world to see. The pain in my chest hadn't vanished, but it now had a purpose. It was no longer a weight, but a fuel source, burning clean and hot, powering a machine that was just now clicking to life. My mind, which had felt clouded by sadness for 3 long years, was now sharp, calculating, seeing every angle, every vulnerability, every step of the path ahead. They had declared war, and in their arrogance they had handed me their entire battle plan. My decision was made. The analysis was complete. It was time for action. I stood up, my movements no longer weary but deliberate. I walked to the old fireproof filing cabinet that stood in the corner of the workshop, a relic from my first office. It was coated in a fine layer of sawdust, untouched for years. My fingers, steady and sure, found the familiar grooves of the combination lock. The metallic clicks of the tumblers falling into place were the loudest sounds I had heard all day, each one a step away from the man I had been this morning. I swung the heavy door open. A faint smell of old paper and ink filled the air. Inside, neatly filed away, was the tangible history of my life's work. The deed to this house and the land it sat on, paid in full 30 years ago. The original hand-signed incorporation papers for Blackwood & Sons Construction. And nestled in the back, a thick folder containing the trust Sarah and I had established for Marcus when he turned 18. A trust whose terms and conditions I recalled with a grim satisfaction I had the sole and absolute power to amend. I pulled the folder out, its weight feeling solid and real in my hands. This was not an invoice based on fantasy and entitlement. This was a foundation built on sweat and foresight. This was real power. I closed the cabinet door with a solid, definitive thud that echoed in the quiet space. I took out my phone. My thumb scrolled through my contacts, gliding right past the name Marcus, without a flicker of hesitation. It stopped on a name I hadn't needed to call in a long time, but one I knew I could count on. The only man besides myself who had been there when the first foundation was poured. The phone rang only once before he answered, his voice the same gravelly baritone I had known for 60 years. Evans Law Office. Charlie, I said, my voice clear and steady, with no trace of the storm that had just passed. It's me, Silas. I need to see you. I paused, looking down at the trust documents in my hand. My path forward now perfectly clear. Cancel your afternoon. I'm coming to your office, and Charlie, bring your best pen. We have something to build. Charlie Evans' law office was a world away from my workshop, where my space was filled with the smell of sawdust and the organized chaos of well-used tools. His was a sanctuary of polished mahogany, the scent of old leather-bound books, and a silence that felt heavy with the weight of confidential histories. Charlie greeted me at the door himself, his usually jovial face creasing with concern the moment he saw me. We had been friends since we were boys, throwing rocks in the same dusty Georgia creek. He knew my face better than I knew my own, and he could see the storm that had just passed through it. "Silas," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Come in. Sit down. What in the hell is wrong?" He led me past his secretary and into his private office, a corner room with a sweeping view of the Atlanta skyline. He closed the door firmly behind us. I didn't take the plush leather chair he offered. Instead, I walked to his expansive desk, cleared a space among the neat stacks of legal files, and laid the spiral-bound proposal down on the gleaming wood. I didn't say a word. I just tapped the cover with my index finger. Charlie leaned over his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. He read the title, a small frown forming on his lips. He flipped it open. I watched his face as he scanned the first page, the cost summary. I saw his eyebrows shoot up. I saw his mouth tighten into a thin, hard line. He took a step back, pulling his glasses off and rubbing his eyes as if to clear them. He looked from the document to me and back again. $390,000. He whispered the words barely audible. Silas, what is this? It's a bill, I said, my voice flat and even. He kept staring at the paper, then picked up the small cream-colored note from Brittany that had fallen out. He read it and a dark flush crept up his neck. His expression shifted from disbelief to a slow-burning rage. I had only seen him truly angry a handful of times in our 60-year friendship, and this was one of them. He looked up at me, his eyes blazing. Since you won't be attending, he choked out, his voice thick with fury. They banned you from the wedding and then sent you the bill, that little gold digging. He stopped himself, taking a deep, shuddering breath. He began to pace behind his desk like a caged lion. That ungrateful whelp. After everything you and Sarah did for him, everything, I swear, Silas, I'll have him disowned. We can cut him out of the trust, the will, everything right now. We can sue them for emotional distress, extortion. He was a good friend. He was reacting exactly as a friend should, with righteous indignation and a call to arms. He was the one having the emotional outburst I had refused to allow myself. I just stood there waiting for the storm to pass. He finally stopped pacing and slammed his open palm down on his desk, making the heavy crystal paperweight jump. Damn it, Silas, say something. Are you just going to let them do this to you? I looked him straight in the eye. No, Charlie, I said quietly. I'm not going to let them do this to me. Good, he said, breathing heavily. So what's our first move? A restraining order? No, I said. Then we start the legal proceedings to cut him off. Now. No, I said again, my voice calm. Charlie stared at me, his anger giving way to pure confusion. He sank into his chair, looking at me as if I had lost my mind. I don't understand, he said, shaking his head. You're not going to fight them. You're not going to cut him off. Then what in God's name are you going to do? Silas, are you actually considering paying this ransom note? I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment, letting the weight of his question settle. I leaned forward, placing both my hands flat on his desk. I'm not considering it, Charlie, I said, my voice low and devoid of any emotion. I'm going to do it. I am going to pay the bill. Every last cent. Charlie looked at me as if I had just confessed to a murder. The color drained from his face. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time in his professional career, Charles Evans, the sharpest lawyer I knew, was speechless. He finally found his voice, a strained whisper. You're insane. You've gone crazy from grief. Silas, that's almost $500,000. For what? So they can laugh at you from Bora Bora, so that woman can wear your life's work on her finger. No, I said, a faint, cold smile touching my lips for the first time that day. I'm going to pay it, but I'm going to pay it my way, on my terms. I'm going to give them everything they want. I am going to build them the wedding of their dreams, a beautiful stage for all their friends to see. So I paused, letting my words sink in. And then, Charlie, I continued, my voice dropping even lower. You and I are going to make sure that when the curtains fall, they are left with absolutely nothing but the debt. I don't want to just cut him off. That's too easy. I want him to learn. I want them to feel the consequences of their actions in front of everyone they're trying so desperately to impress. A slow understanding began to dawn in Charlie's eyes, chasing away the confusion. The lawyer in him, the strategist, was awakening. The anger was still there, but it was being channeled, focused. A contract, he breathed. You want to build a contract? Exactly, I said, tapping the invoice. They've made a proposal. I am going to make a counter-proposal, one they will be too greedy and too arrogant to refuse. The flush returned to Charlie's face, but this time it was not from anger. It was from the thrill of the fight. A wide, predatory grin spread across his face, the kind he got when he smelled blood in the water during a deposition. Oh, this is good, he said, rubbing his hands together. This is better than good. This is biblical. Tell me everything. I pulled the chair up, finally sitting down. And for the next hour, in the quiet of his office with the city of Atlanta sprawling beneath us, I laid out the blueprints for my son's demolition. Charlie leaned back in his high-backed leather chair, the predatory grin still on his face. He steepled his fingers, looking at me over the top of them. "All right, Silas," he said, his voice now a low, conspiratorial hum. "You have my full and undivided attention. Walk me through it. The demolition plan." I took a deep breath. "It's simple, Charlie. We don't refuse, we agree. We don't argue, we accommodate. We give them everything they want. But every single dollar, from the first deposit for the wedding cake to the last tip for the valet, will come with a string attached. A string that only I can pull." Charlie nodded slowly, his lawyer's mind already turning the tumblers. "Control," he said. "Absolute control over the flow of money. I like it. So how do we structure it?" "We create a new entity," I said, leaning forward. "A trust. We'll fund it with the full $390,000. Not a penny more, not a penny less. And we'll give it a name they can't resist, something that feeds their ego. We'll call it the Blackwood Cunningham Legacy Fund." A sharp, appreciative laugh escaped Charlie's lips. "Oh, you are a cruel man, Silas Blackwood," he said, shaking his head in admiration. "That's brilliant. It makes them feel like partners. It sounds like an inheritance they're just getting a little early. They'll be so busy admiring the name on the letterhead they'll never bother to read the fine print." "And what will the fine print say, Charlie?" I asked. This was his domain now. I had the blueprint. He would build the legal machinery. He got up and started to pace again, but this time it wasn't with anger. It was with the focused energy of a master craftsman. Okay, he began, thinking out loud. "First, the trust itself. It has to be irrevocable so they can't challenge its existence. We'll put the money in, and it's officially their wedding fund. However," he said, turning to point a finger at me, "you, Silas Blackwood, will be named as the sole non-removable trustee. The language will be ironclad. It will state that the trustee has absolute and sole discretion over any and all disbursements. Any payment for any reason requires your personal written approval. No one else can authorize a single dime." "Good," I said. "So they'll have to come to me for every check." "Not directly," Charlie corrected, a sly look in his eye. "That would make them suspicious. We need a layer of insulation, a firewall. All communication, all invoices, all contracts must be submitted in writing to the trustee's legal representative, me." My respect for my friend deepened. He wasn't just building a wall, he was building a maze. "So they'll be dealing only with you." "Exactly," he said, warming to the theme. "They'll send me the vendor contracts. I'll review them. And this," he said, stopping his pacing and leaning on the desk, "is where the real trap is laid. Before we send the contracts back to them for their signatures, we will add a few custom addendums, little clauses buried in the legal jargon that their high-priced wedding planner will never notice, and they'll be too arrogant to read themselves." He started ticking points off on his fingers. 1. The personal liability clause. "We'll insert a line into every single vendor contract that states that in the event the Blackwood Cunningham Legacy Fund is unable or unwilling to provide final payment for any reason, the full financial liability for the outstanding balance reverts to the signatory of the contract. Marcus." I said the name, tasting like ash. "Marcus," Charlie confirmed with a grim nod. "He'll be so excited to sign his name on a $50,000 catering bill he won't even realize he's putting his own financial future on the line." 2, Charlie continued, "the final payment stipulation. Every contract will specify that while deposits will be paid in advance, the final largest payment, usually about 75% of the total, is due in full no later than 24 hours prior to the event or service. And we'll add that failure to meet this deadline results in immediate non-negotiable cancellation of all services with all prior deposits forfeited." "So on the day of the wedding," I began, "the caterers won't cook, the band won't play, and the flowers won't arrive unless that final payment is cleared." Charlie finished, his grin returning. "And who has the sole discretion to approve that final payment?" "I do," I said, the cold resolve hardening in my gut. "Precisely. And 3, just for good measure, we'll call it the publicity clause. A small line stating that the events financed by the fund are considered private, and any unauthorized media presence or recording can be considered a breach of contract." "Why that?" I asked. "So that when the whole thing implodes," Charlie said, his eyes gleaming, "and they try to spin some story to the press or on social media about the poor mistreated couple whose father ruined their wedding, we can hit them with a breach of contract lawsuit. It takes away their ability to control the narrative. We will be the only ones telling the story. I sat back stunned by the beautiful, brutal efficiency of it all. It was a perfect legal cage constructed from their own greed and arrogance. Every bar, every lock was a direct consequence of their own demands. They were going to walk into the trap not just willingly, but eagerly convinced it was a palace built in their honor. "So the plan is this," Charlie summarized, grabbing a legal pad and a pen. "Step 1, I draft the trust documents for the Blackwood Cunningham Legacy Fund today. Step 2, you call Marcus and Brittany and tell them with all the grace of a loving father that you have seen the error of your ways, and you will be honored to fund their wedding via this magnificent trust you've created in their name. Step 3, you instruct them that to make things easy, all paperwork must be funneled through my office. Step 4, he said, scribbling furiously, we sit back, approve the small deposits, amend the contracts, and let them build their own scaffold. And step 5, he looked up at me, his expression deadly serious. On the day before the wedding, you, my friend, turn off the money tap, and we watch. I nodded slowly. That's the plan. It was a declaration of war disguised as an act of surrender, a demolition order disguised as a building permit. It was the only language my son and his fiancée seemed to understand, the cold, unforgiving language of contracts and consequences. For the first time in 3 years, I felt the heavy cloak of grief begin to lift, replaced not by happiness, but by a powerful, unyielding sense of purpose. I was no longer just a father. I was a client, and I had the best damn lawyer in Atlanta on my side. I let a full day pass after my meeting with Charlie. The trust documents were being drafted, the legal machinery was grinding into motion, and I needed the time to prepare myself for the role I was about to play. This next step required more than just strategy. It required a performance. I had to be believable. I had to be the loving, slightly defeated father they expected me to be. I sat at my kitchen table, the morning light streaming in, holding a lukewarm cup of coffee. The invoice, now a key piece of evidence in my own quiet war, lay in a folder next to me. I had practiced the conversation in my head a dozen times. I knew what I needed to say, and more importantly, how I needed to sound. My voice couldn't hold any of the cold resolve I felt. It had to be tinged with resignation, with a weary desire for peace. I took a deep breath, picked up my phone, and dialed Marcus's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice wary. "Dad, Marcus," I said, my voice carefully measured. "Is Brittany there with you? I'd like to speak to you both, if I may." There was a brief pause, a muffled exchange in the background. "Yeah, Dad, you're on speaker. What's up?" I've had some time to think." I began, letting a sigh escape my lips. "About our last conversation. And about the proposal you sent." I could almost feel their tension through the phone, the anticipation of another argument. "I want to apologize," I said softly. "I was shocked and I reacted poorly. A father has his duties, and I haven't been myself since your mother passed." The lie felt slick and unnatural, but I pushed it forward. "The last thing Sarah would have wanted is for money to come between us. And the last thing I want is to cast a shadow over the happiest day of your life." I let the silence stretch, giving them time to absorb my surrender. Finally, Brittany's voice, cautious but hopeful, broke the quiet. "So, what are you saying, Mr. Blackwood?" This was the moment. "I'm saying you're right." I said the words costing me more than any check ever could. "I want you to have the wedding you've always dreamed of. I will take care of the bill, all of it." The reaction was instantaneous. A high-pitched shriek of pure, unfiltered delight erupted from the phone. It was Brittany. "Oh my God. Marcus, did you hear that? Oh, Mr. Blackwood, thank you. Thank you so much. I knew you'd come around. This is just wonderful. Now we can finally confirm the booking with Serafina Gardens and call the designer back. This is the best news ever." Her joy was so nakedly transactional, it was almost comical. There was no mention of family, no mention of my feelings. It was purely about the acquisitions her victory had unlocked. Then I heard Marcus's voice, thick with relief. "Wow, Dad, thanks. That means a lot." There it was, a flicker of something more, a hint of the son I once knew. But it was quickly extinguished by Brittany's triumphant planning. "This changes everything," she gushed. "We won't have to settle for the second-best floral arrangements, and we can definitely upgrade the honeymoon package." I let her go on for another moment, her excitement serving as the perfect cover for my next move. When she finally paused for a breath, I spoke again, my tone warm and paternal. "I'm glad you're happy, both of you," I said. "And to make this official, and to do something special to honor your mother's memory, I've had my lawyer Charlie Evans set up a formal trust for this purpose. I've already funded it with the full amount. It's called the Blackwood Cunningham Legacy Fund." "The Blackwood Cunningham Legacy Fund," Brittany repeated slowly, tasting the words. I could hear the ego-stroking effect it had on her. "Wow, that sounds so official, so important." "It is important," I said smoothly. "This is my legacy, and now it's yours too. The fund is dedicated solely to your wedding and honeymoon expenses. Now, to keep things clean and professional for everyone, Charlie will be handling all the payments directly from the fund. It's much simpler this way. You won't have to worry about a thing. Just have all your vendors, your planner, everyone send their contracts and invoices directly to his office. He'll review them and cut the checks. It'll be easier for everyone." The hook was in the water. I held my breath. The silence on their end was not one of suspicion, but of pure, unadulterated pleasure at the thought of having what amounted to a personal financial manager for their wedding. "You mean we just tell people to bill your lawyer?" Brittany asked, her voice filled with awe. "That is incredibly chic." "It's efficient," I corrected gently. "It ensures everything is handled properly. Charlie will take good care of you." "Yes," Marcus said, his relief now complete. "Yeah, that's great, Dad. That takes all the pressure off. Thank you." "You're welcome, son," I said, the words feeling like foreign objects in my mouth. "Now I'll let you two get back to your planning. I'm sure you have a lot of calls to make." "We do," Brittany chirped. "Thank you again, Mr. Blackwood. You won't regret this." "Oh, I know I won't," I thought, "but you will." "Talk to you soon," I said, and ended the call. I placed the phone down on the table. The silence of the kitchen rushed back in. My performance was over. The bait had been taken. They were celebrating their great victory, never once questioning why their defeated father sounded so calm, so organized. They were so blinded by the dollar signs they couldn't see the bars of the cage being built around them. And I, the loving father, had just handed them the blueprints. The first move came 4 days later. I was in the workshop sanding down the cedar box when my phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from Brittany. Marcus's name was copied, a silent partner in the correspondence. The subject line was simply, "A quick question and so much gratitude." I set my sanding block down, wiped my hands, and opened the message. The tone was sickeningly sweet, a confection of fake affection and corporate politeness. "Dear Mr. Blackwood," it began. "I hope this email finds you well. Marcus and I wanted to once again express our deepest, most sincere gratitude for your incredible generosity. Creating the Blackwood Cunningham Legacy Fund was such a thoughtful, powerful gesture, and it truly feels like Sarah's spirit is a part of this celebration. It means the world to us." I had to pause and take a breath. The casual way she invoked my wife's name as a shield for her greed was a special kind of poison. I read on. "On that note, we've had a tiny change of plans that we're actually incredibly excited about. The original band we booked for the reception just had to cancel due to a scheduling conflict. We were devastated at first, but it turns out it was a blessing in disguise. It just so happens that Velvet Fusion, the jazz ensemble that played at the Governor's Ball last year, has a last-minute opening. It feels like fate." I could almost hear her manufactured excitement through the screen. Of course, they are a bit more of an investment than our original choice, but the ambiance they would create is simply priceless. It would elevate the entire evening. We know it's an extra expense we hadn't planned for, but we thought of your beautiful gesture with the fund, and we felt you would want the event to be as perfect as possible. I've attached their contract for your review. Please let us know what you think." I scrolled down and opened the attachment. The original band had been budgeted at $25,000. The contract for Velvet Fusion was for $60,000. A $35,000 increase requested, without a flicker of shame, less than a week after I had agreed to their initial exorbitant demands. This was the test. The first nibble on the line. They were seeing how far they could push, how much the loving father was willing to bend. I felt a cold smile touch my lips. It was happening exactly as Charlie and I had predicted. Her email was a masterclass in manipulation, framing a greedy desire as a fated opportunity and cloaking it in the language of shared celebration. I didn't reply to her. I didn't have to. I simply forwarded the entire email chain with the contract attached to Charlie. My own message was just a single line. "Charlie, please review and process this from the fund." I hit send and went back to my sanding, the rhythmic motion calming my nerves. The ball was in Charlie's court now. The machine was doing its work. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Brittany. A string of champagne bottle and heart emojis followed a short, ecstatic message. "Velvet Fusion is confirmed. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Charlie is an absolute dream to work with, so professional. This is going to be the wedding of the year. XXO. The hook was set. Deeply. The ease of that first transaction, the professionalism of her lawyer handling the details was all the encouragement she needed. The floodgates opened. The initial proposal, the one that had shocked me to my core, became nothing more than a suggested starting point. A week later, another email. This one was about the floral arrangements. The original $45,000 budget apparently was merely for standard blooms. The florist had introduced Brittany to a rare imported orchid from Hawaii that would create an unforgettable sensory experience. It was only another $20,000. I forwarded it to Charlie. A few days after that, an upgrade to the catering. The chef had suggested a champagne and oyster bar for the cocktail hour. "It's what everyone is doing in the Hamptons," Brittany wrote, as if that were the only justification needed. The cost, $17,000. I forwarded it to Charlie. The emails became a weekly, sometimes daily occurrence. Each one followed the same formula, a gushing thank you followed by a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that always came with a hefty price tag. An ice sculpture of 2 swans intricately carved. A pre-wedding brunch for out-of-town guests at the Four Seasons. A custom-built dance floor with their initials monogrammed in gold leaf. Upgraded honeymoon flights from business class to a first-class suite. With every request, my response was the same, a silent, immediate forward to Charlie's office. I never spoke to them about the money. I never questioned a single expense. My silence was my greatest weapon. They mistook it for weakness, for the resignation of a foolish old man who could be easily parted from his money. They had no idea that my silence was the quiet hum of a well-oiled machine meticulously documenting their every move. Each new contract they sent was another bar in the cage they were building for themselves. Charlie would receive the documents, his paralegals would redraft them with our special addendums and send them back for Marcus's signature. And Marcus, blinded by the spectacle of it all and placated by Brittany, signed every single one. I got one phone call from him during that time. It was brief and awkward. "Hey, Dad," he said. "Just wanted to check in." "I'm here, son," I said. "Sounds like you two are busy." "Yeah." He laughed, a nervous, hollow sound. "Brittany's really getting into the details, huh? She's a perfectionist. Thanks for being so cool about it all." "It's the wedding she deserves," I said, my voice perfectly neutral. "I'm happy to help." He was relieved to hear it. He didn't want to know the details. He didn't want to see the numbers. He just wanted the party, the prestige, without any of the responsibility. He was a willing accomplice in his own fleecing. By the end of the second month, Charlie sent me an updated spreadsheet. The original budget of $390,000 was a distant memory. The new projected total with all of Brittany's upgrades was pushing closer to $500,000. I looked at the numbers on the screen. I felt no anger. I felt no panic. I felt only the grim satisfaction of an architect watching his demolition plan proceed exactly on schedule. They thought they were cashing a blank check. They didn't understand they were signing a confession over and over again. Every contract, every invoice was another piece of evidence. Every dollar they spent was another pound of pressure on the faulty foundation they were so proudly standing on. And soon, very soon, I was going to give it a little push. The ease of that first victory emboldened them. It was like chum in the water. They had tested the limits, found none, and now a feeding frenzy was about to begin. I didn't have to wait long. About a week after the band was confirmed, another email from Brittany arrived. This one was titled, "A Toast to the Future." "Dearest Silas," she wrote, "I had been promoted from Mr. Blackwood now that the money was flowing freely. I was just finalizing the catering details with the chef at Serafina Gardens, and he made the most marvelous suggestion. He said that for an event of this caliber, the standard champagne simply wouldn't do. He has access to a very limited allocation of a vintage 2008 Cristal that a certain Hollywood actor recently served at his wedding. Can you imagine the prestige? It would be the talk of the town. It's a bit of a splurge, of course, but these are the little details that make an event truly unforgettable. I told him we'd have to check, but I was secretly confident you'd want us to have the absolute best. The attached invoice was for an additional $15,000 just for the champagne upgrade. $15,000 for bubbly party juice. I thought about the first home Sarah and I had bought, a tiny little bungalow that cost $20,000, a sum we had to scrape and save for over 5 years to afford. The casualness with which Brittany proposed spending nearly that much on a beverage was breathtaking. I took a screenshot of the email, saved it to a special folder on my computer I had labeled Evidence, and then I forwarded the message to Charlie. My instruction was, as always, a simple "please proceed." A few days later, a text from Brittany. It was a picture of her and Marcus clinking 2 champagne flutes together, their faces beaming. The caption read, "Practicing for the big day, thanks to the best father-in-law a girl could ask for, #Cristal." This became the new rhythm of my life. Every few days, a new email, a new once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It was a fire hose of frivolous demands. First, it was the ice sculpture. Brittany had been to a charity gala and had seen a massive glittering sculpture of the company's logo. She decided with absolute certainty that they needed one for their wedding. Not a logo, but 2 life-sized swans, their necks forming a heart. She had already commissioned a quote from a renowned ice artisan. The price, $10,000. The email arrived on a Tuesday. I forwarded it to Charlie. The deposit was paid on a Thursday. Then came the expansion of the event itself. The original plan was for a wedding. Now Brittany decided it needed to be a wedding weekend. This, she explained in a long and rambling email, was necessary to properly host their many important guests who were flying in from out of town. It would start with a welcome cocktail soiree on Friday night, then a bridal luncheon on Saturday for her and her friends, and finally a farewell brunch on Sunday morning. Each event required its own venue, its own catering, its own floral arrangements. She had already taken the liberty of getting proposals for all 3. The total for these additional parties came to just over $60,000. This was a significant escalation. It was no longer about upgrading existing items. It was about adding entirely new, monumentally expensive events to the schedule. This was a true test of my resolve. For a moment, a flash of the old anger returned, but I pushed it down. A builder does not get angry at his materials. He simply uses them. I forwarded the proposal to Charlie. That evening, Charlie called me. His voice was strained. "Silas, are you reading these?" he asked without any preamble. "A welcome soiree, a $60,000 weekend package. This is getting out of hand." "Is it?" I asked calmly, sanding a piece of oak in my workshop. "It seems to be proceeding exactly as we planned." "They're taking you for a fool, Si," he exclaimed. "They're laughing all the way to the bank." "Let them laugh, Charlie," I said, my voice low and even. "The louder they laugh now, the quieter they'll be on the big day. Are our clauses in the new contracts?" "Of course," he grumbled. "Ironclad. Marcus is personally on the hook for every single canapé and cocktail napkin." "Then the plan is working," I said. "Keep approving the deposits, Charlie. Let them build their castle as high as they want. The fall will be that much greater." My calm seemed to unnerve him, but he agreed. The approvals continued. The final, most audacious request came about a month before the wedding. It was about the honeymoon. The overwater villa in Bora Bora, the one that cost $45,000, was apparently no longer sufficient. Brittany had discovered that the resort had a single exclusive presidential villa. It was a private island compound with its own beach, a personal chef, a butler, and a private yacht. "I know it's extravagant," she wrote her email, dripping with faux humility, "but our honeymoon is a sacred time. It's the foundation for our entire marriage. Don't you think our foundation should be as strong and as beautiful as possible?" The audacity of her using my own metaphor against me was almost impressive. The upgrade would cost another $30,000. I didn't even hesitate. I forwarded it to Charlie. By the time the final spreadsheets were being prepared, the wedding had metastasized. The original $390,000 invoice seemed like a quaint memory from a more innocent time. The new grand total was well over $500,000. They had taken every inch I had given them and stretched it into a marathon. They were completely insulated from the reality of their spending, protected by the magical fund and the efficient work of my lawyer. They believed they were savvy negotiators getting everything they wanted. They had no idea they were simply convicts happily ordering the most expensive meal possible for their own Last Supper. The weeks that followed settled into a strange and quiet routine. The flood of emails from Brittany became the new normal. Each one was a new demand, a new escalation wrapped in the cloying sweetness of her gratitude. And each one was met with the same silent, methodical response from me, a simple forward to Charlie's office. I spent my days in the workshop, losing myself in the familiar scent of cedar and the satisfying scrape of a plane on wood. I was building things, creating order with my hands, while just a few miles away in a high-rise office downtown, my oldest friend was meticulously preparing for a demolition. About a month into this new arrangement, Charlie called me. "The first big one is here," he said, his voice a low hum of professional excitement. "The contract from Serafina Gardens. I think you should come down and see this. It's time to inspect the machinery." When I walked into his office, the atmosphere was different. The air of quiet contemplation was gone, replaced by a focused intensity. Charlie wasn't my grieving friend anymore. He was a general in his war room. On his vast mahogany desk, 2 documents lay side by side. One was the original contract from the venue, a thick stack of pages filled with glossy photos and flowery language. The other was a slim, severe-looking addendum drafted on Charlie's own letterhead. "Sit down, Silas," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. "Welcome to the factory." He slid the original contract toward me. "This is what they sent. Standard venue agreement. All the usual stuff about deposits, cancellation policies, liability for damages. It's designed to protect them, the venue. It's a perfectly reasonable, well-drafted document for a normal transaction. But this," he said, his voice dropping, "is not a normal transaction." Then he pushed the addendum forward with a reverence typically reserved for a sacred text. "And this," he said with a grim smile, "is our little improvement. This is designed to protect you, and more importantly, it is designed to hold them accountable. This is where the trap is set." He put on his reading glasses and picked up the document, its crisp pages rustling in the quiet room. "My paralegals have templated this, so the same core clauses will be attached to every single contract that passes through this office. But this is the big one. The $120,000 anchor. I want you to understand exactly how it works, every gear, every spring." He pointed to the first section, his finger tracing the elegant script of the title. "We're calling this Addendum B regarding payment from fiduciary funds. Sounds boring, right? That's intentional. People skip the boring parts. It's human nature. Their eyes will glaze over before they even get to the first sentence." He cleared his throat and began to read a paragraph dense with legal jargon. The words were a thicket of heretofores, notwithstanding, pursuant to, and fiduciary duty. It was a language designed to be impenetrable to the layman, a wall of text that actively discouraged reading. When he finished, he looked up at me over his glasses. "In English," he said, a teacher translating a dead language, "that little paragraph does 2 very important things. First, it legally defines the Blackwood-Cunningham Legacy Fund as the primary but not sole source of payment. That distinction is critical. Second, it establishes you, Silas Blackwood, as the sole and non-removable trustee with absolute and final discretion over any and all disbursements. The language is ironclad. It essentially makes you the bank, a bank with a single executive officer who answers to no one." I nodded slowly, admiring the cold efficiency of the language. It was like a perfectly joined piece of wood, seamless and strong. "But that's just the setup," Charlie continued, his excitement growing. "That's the foundation. The real teeth are in the next 2 clauses. These are the load-bearing walls of our entire structure. Clause 2A, the personal liability covenant." He read another paragraph even denser than the first, a verbal labyrinth of indemnification and personal guarantees. "And this one," he translated, a glint of predatory light in his eyes, "is my personal favorite. It says that the signatory of the contract, in this case, your son Marcus, agrees that in the event the fund is unable or unwilling for any reason whatsoever to provide payment, he, Marcus Blackwood, becomes personally and solely responsible for the entire outstanding balance. Not you, not the fund. Him. We even included language that specifies that this personal liability is absolute and cannot be discharged by claims of duress or misunderstanding. He is in the eyes of this contract a sophisticated party entering into a binding financial agreement. So he's personally guaranteeing a six-figure debt without even knowing it. I said the words feeling heavy in my mouth. He's co-signing his own ruin, Charlie corrected, his voice sharp. He'll be so thrilled to see his name on a contract for a place like Serafina Gardens he won't even blink. He'll see the signature line, he'll see the title client, and his ego will do the rest. Now for the kill shot. Clause 2B, the final disbursement and service guarantee. He read the final clause. This one was shorter, sharper, the language less ornate and more brutal. This one is simple and direct, he explained, so there can be no ambiguity when the time comes. It stipulates that while the initial 50% deposit will be paid upon signing, the final 50% balance is due in cleared funds no later than 5:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the business day immediately preceding the scheduled event. It then says that failure to meet this deadline for any reason constitutes a material breach of contract resulting in the immediate and irrevocable termination of all services. All prior deposits and payments will be forfeited as liquidated damages, and the venue will be under no obligation to allow the event, its hosts, or any of its guests onto the premises. I leaned back in my chair, the full brutal elegance of his plan settling over me. It was a perfect legal cage constructed from their own greed and arrogance. So the day before the wedding, I said, if I don't approve that final payment, then at 5 o'clock there is no wedding. Charlie finished, a thin, dangerous smile on his face. The gates are locked. The staff goes home. The lights are turned off. And according to the contract Marcus is about to sign, the venue is perfectly within its legal rights to do so. He has no recourse, no one to sue. He will have agreed in writing to the terms of his own public humiliation. I looked at my old friend, this man I had known since childhood, and saw the brilliant, ruthless strategist he was. He hadn't just built a trap. He had built it using the enemy's own materials, their own arrogance, their own lack of diligence. Will they really not read it, Charlie? I asked the question, feeling naive even as I said it. Charlie chuckled, a dry, cynical sound that echoed in the quiet office. Silas, let me tell you something I've learned in 40 years of law. People who are getting something for free never ever read the fine print. Caution is a luxury you can't afford when you're blinded by greed. They'll see the official letterhead from my firm. They'll see the big, impressive words. They'll assume it's all standard procedure, just boring legal stuff to protect the legacy fund. Brittany will tell Marcus to just sign it so they can get on with the more important business of tasting cakes and picking out flowers. And he will, every single time. He picked up the amended contract and slid it into a fresh courier envelope. The crisp sound of the paper was like the cocking of a rifle. My secretary has the templates ready, he said. The florist contract came in this morning. The photographer from New York sent theirs yesterday. The $60,000 jazz band. They're all getting the same treatment. We're running an assembly line here. Each contract Marcus signs is another nail in the coffin he's building for himself. A coffin lined with silk and imported orchids, but a coffin nonetheless. He sealed the envelope and placed it in the outgoing mail tray on his desk. The gesture was casual, but it felt momentous. This goes back to them this afternoon, he said. Now we just wait for the signature. I stood up and walked to the large window overlooking the city. Cars moved like blood cells through the arteries of the metropolis below. Everyone down there was in a hurry, chasing something. Money, status, happiness. My son was one of them. He was chasing a version of life he saw in magazines, and he was willing to trade his own father's legacy to get it. I felt a pang of a familiar sadness, the last ghost of the father I used to be. But it was quickly replaced by the cold resolve of the man I had become. Thank you, Charlie, I said, not turning from the window. It's a fine piece of work, a solid foundation. Don't thank me yet, he said from behind me, his voice a low growl. The real work hasn't even begun. But don't you worry, Silas. When this is all over, they'll have learned a very valuable lesson in construction. Never, ever build your house on a foundation of lies. The email from Charlie arrived the next afternoon. The subject line was a single triumphant word, hooked. Attached was a scanned PDF. I opened it. It was the amended contract for the Serafina Gardens, all 25 pages of it. And there on the final page, next to the line designating him as the client and personal guarantor, was my son's signature, Marcus Blackwood. It was a careless, confident scrawl, the signature of a man who had never had to worry about the consequences of his own name. Charlie told me they had returned it in less than 24 hours. There was no way they could have read it, let alone understood it. In my mind's eye, I could see the scene as clearly as if I had been there. I have spent my life understanding how people behave, how they think, and I knew my son and his fiancée all too well. I pictured them holding court on the rooftop terrace of some chic downtown hotel, the Atlanta skyline sprawling behind them like a conquered territory. They wouldn't be alone. They would be with friends, another couple, just like them, named Chad and Tiffany, perhaps people whose admiration they desperately craved. The late afternoon sun would be glinting off their expensive watches and designer sunglasses. The conversation would be a performance, a carefully curated recital of their recent acquisitions and social triumphs. In the middle of this performance, a uniformed courier would approach their table holding a sleek black portfolio. This in itself was part of the show. Brittany would look up, a small theatrical sigh of pleasant annoyance on her lips. "Oh, that must be from the lawyer," she would announce to the table, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "More wedding business. It truly never ends." The courier would present the envelope. Brittany would open it with a flourish, her perfectly manicured nails slitting the seal. She'd pull out the thick stack of papers and glance at the cover letter from Charlie's firm, her eyes lighting up, not at the legal details, but at the prestigious downtown address on the letterhead. "Here we are," she would say, pushing the document across the white marble table to Marcus. "The final contract for the gardens, just a formality. We just need to sign it and send it back. Then we can finally announce the venue on social media. My friends are dying to know." Marcus, in my imagination, would have that flicker of due diligence, that faint, dying echo of the lessons I had tried to teach him. He'd pick it up, feel the heft of it in his hands. It would feel important. "Wow, this is a lot of pages," he might say, a hint of unease in his voice. "Shouldn't we, read this? It looks different from the first one. There's this whole extra section attached." That is the moment, the fork in the road, the single instant where a different choice could have changed everything. But I could see Brittany's reaction, as well as if I were sitting right there. A dismissive wave of her hand, an exasperated sigh that was both playful and deeply condescending. "Oh, Marcus, don't be so tedious," she would say, smiling sweetly at their friends, making him the butt of a gentle inside joke. "It's a standard contract from a major venue, and it's all being handled by your father's lawyer. Do you really think they'd put something weird in there? It's just boilerplate, legal stuff." "But," he might insist weakly, his voice already losing conviction. "It's $120,000, Britt. Maybe I should just—" "Honey," she would interrupt, her voice firm, but still smiling. "The courier is waiting, and our friends are waiting, and this champagne isn't going to drink itself. Are you seriously going to spend the most beautiful afternoon reading fine print, or are you going to help me choose the filter for our announcement picture?" She would turn to their friends. "He's so adorably old-fashioned, isn't he? He gets it from his father. They love their details." Chad would laugh. "Dude, just sign it. If your dad's footing the bill, his lawyer's got it covered. Wish my old man was like that." And that would be it. The fight, if you could even call it that, would be over. The fear of being seen as tedious, as difficult, as uncool in her eyes and in front of his friends would be far greater than his fear of signing a legal document he didn't understand. Brittany would produce an absurdly expensive-looking fountain pen from her purse. "Here," she would say, "use the good one. This is a moment to celebrate." Defeated Marcus would take the pen, and with a sigh of resignation that was part relief and part surrender, he would scrawl his name on the line. He wouldn't see the words printed just below it, "personal guarantor." He would only see a space that needed to be filled to make the problem go away, to make Brittany happy, to get back to the party. He would sign his name, and in doing so, he would hand me the keys to his future. The courier would take the portfolio, and the four of them would raise their glasses. "To the wedding of the century," Chad would shout. "To the Blackwood-Cunningham legacy," Brittany would add with a triumphant glance at Marcus. I knew this scene, or one very much like it, had happened, because it became a pattern. A week later, the contract for Velvet Fusion arrived at their condo. This time, I pictured them signing it over cocktails in their living room, music playing in the background as they got ready to go out for the night. They were celebrating their own cleverness, laughing at how easy it all was. Marcus probably didn't even glance at the pages just signed, where Brittany pointed, his judgment clouded by expensive whiskey and the thrill of their new life. Then came the caterer's contract with its $17,000 oyster bar. I imagined them signing it in the back of an Uber on the way to a gallery, opening the document illuminated by the glow of their phones as they checked their social media feeds. The florist, the photographer, the ice artisan, the welcome brunch. Each one came with Charlie's carefully crafted addendum. Each one was returned with Marcus's oblivious signature. It was a parade of carelessness, a testament to the blinding power of greed. They were so busy performing the role of wealthy, important people that they couldn't be bothered with the actual work of it. They wanted the castle, but they refused to inspect the foundations. I, on the other hand, had spent a lifetime inspecting foundations. It was the core of who I was. Before I ever laid a single brick, I would study the blueprints for hours, walk the ground, test the soil. I knew that a single miscalculation at the start could lead to a catastrophic failure at the end. My son saw my caution as a weakness of an older generation, a tedious obsession with details in a world that moved too fast. He didn't understand that the details were the only thing that mattered. The details were the difference between a house that stands for 100 years and one that collapses in the first strong wind. With every signed contract that Charlie forwarded to me, a quiet, heartbreaking tragedy was playing out in a series of PDF attachments. My son was surrendering his life piece by piece, and he didn't even know it. He was so focused on the party, he never once thought about who would have to clean up the mess. And now all the documents were signed. All the nails had been hammered into place. The beautiful, fragile structure of their dream was complete, and they stood inside it, admiring the view, never once noticing the demolition charges that had been built into its very walls. Of all the signed contracts that eventually made their way to Charlie's secure files, there was one that I often found myself thinking about. It was the contract for the Welcome Weekend, the $60,000 edition that ballooned the budget and the scope of the event into something truly monstrous. It was the moment the project moved from merely extravagant to grotesquely excessive. And I have to believe for my own peace of mind that it was the moment my son felt his first true pang of doubt. The moment a warning bell, however faint, went off in the back of his mind, and the moment he chose to ignore it. I wasn't there, of course, but I can picture the scene. I imagine it happening on a Sunday afternoon in their new minimalist condo, a place paid for by one of my earlier, more foolish checks. Boxes from designer stores would be stacked in the corners, fabric swatches for table linens fanned out across the glass coffee table. The air would be thick with the scent of expensive candles and the low thrum of some trendy ambient music. They would not be relaxing. They would be working. Their work was the curation of their own image. The courier would have just left. The thick contract for the weekend package would be sitting on the table, another trophy of their successful negotiation with my bank account, and Marcus would pick it up. I see him sinking into the white leather sofa, the document feeling unnervingly heavy in his lap. He'd flip through the pages, not reading but sensing the sheer volume of the commitment. He'd see the cost breakdown for the cocktail soiree, the line item for the custom floral arrangements for the brunch, the fee for the private room at the hotel, and something finally would give him pause. "Britt," he would say, his voice quiet, uncertain. "Another one. This is a lot. $60,000 for a brunch and a cocktail party. The original budget for the whole wedding wasn't much more than this a few months ago." Brittany, I imagine, would be across the room scrolling through a wedding photographer's Instagram feed on her tablet, completely absorbed. She'd look up annoyed at the interruption, her smile tight. "It's an investment in our social capital, honey," she'd say, using one of the phrases she'd picked up from a business magazine. "These are important people. We have to host them properly." "I know, but..." he would continue, pushing forward against his own discomfort. "And this addendum from Charlie's office. It's on every single contract. Did you ever actually read it? It just feels like, I don't know, maybe I should have Charlie's office walk me through what it all means before I sign another one. This is it. This is the moment. The final off-ramp on the highway to disaster. He is explicitly suggesting he should understand what he's signing. For a split second, the son I raised, the one I taught to measure twice and cut once, is present in that room. But Brittany would have none of it. Her reaction would be swift, a masterclass in emotional manipulation. She wouldn't get angry. Anger was crude. She would get hurt. She'd put down her tablet with a theatrical sigh, her face a mask of wounded disappointment. "Are you serious, Marcus?" she would ask, her voice soft and laced with disbelief. After all the work I've put into this, I am on the phone 12 hours a day, coordinating with a dozen different vendors, managing every tiny detail to create the most important weekend of our lives, and you're sitting there questioning me over some boring paperwork. He'd immediately start to backtrack. No, that's not what I mean. I just think, it's just legal stuff, honey. She'd cut him off, her tone shifting to one of condescending reassurance. It's how these things are done when you're dealing with this amount of money. It's to protect the fund. It's standard procedure. And then she would deliver the line that was the very core of their fatal flaw, the rotten beam upon which they had built their entire fantasy. Besides, she'd say, walking over to him, perching on the arm of the sofa and stroking his hair, what are you worried about? It's your dad's money. He's the one who set this all up. It's his responsibility to make sure everything is okay. He's the one paying for it, so his lawyer is our lawyer. They're on our side. He wouldn't let anything bad happen. The logic is so beautifully, tragically flawed. The idea that because I was paying my lawyer was somehow working for them. The idea that my money came without my oversight. It was the ultimate expression of their entitlement. And when Marcus still looked uncertain, she would deploy her final weapon. Her face would harden just slightly. Do you not trust me, Marcus? She would ask, her voice losing its warmth. Do you not trust your own father? I thought we were a team building our future together. If you're going to get cold feet and question every little detail, then maybe you're not ready for this kind of life. Maybe you're not ready for me. And there it is. The choice is made explicit. It is a choice between responsibility and her, between caution and her love. And my son, the man I had hoped was strong, would make his choice. No, of course not, babe, he would say quickly, the panic of losing her far greater than the vague anxiety about a legal document. You're right. I'm sorry. You're doing such an amazing job. I trust you. The smile would return to her face, her victory complete. I know, honey, she would say, kissing his forehead. Now sign it. The caterer for the brunch needs the deposit by tomorrow to hold the date. And he would. He would pick up the pen, and with a final sighing breath of surrender, he would sign his name on the last line. The warning bell had been silenced. The final chance had been dismissed. He had looked for one brief shining moment at the complex machinery of his own choices, and then willingly chosen to remain ignorant. In that moment, he wasn't just signing a contract for a party. He was signing the deed to his own downfall. And I, his father, was the silent, waiting beneficiary. The first invitation arrived 2 weeks after the last of the major contracts had been signed. It was a text message from Brittany, complete with a string of festive emojis. Silas, we're having the official menu tasting at Serafina Gardens on Saturday. The chef is preparing a special presentation for us. We would be absolutely honored if you would join and give us your wisdom. XO. The word wisdom was a masterstroke of casual condescension. She didn't want my wisdom. She wanted an audience. She wanted the man who was funding the spectacle to be present to witness her ascension, to applaud her impeccable taste. It was a summons disguised as an olive branch. And it was the perfect opportunity for the next phase of my plan. This was the moment I had to move from being the silent, distant benefactor to the engaged, doting father. I had to step onto their stage and play my part. I texted back a simple, humble reply. I would be delighted. Thank you for including me. I spent the next 2 days preparing. This wasn't just a lunch, it was a performance. I chose my clothes with care, not a suit which would seem too formal, but a pair of well-pressed trousers, a crisp button-down shirt, and a soft cashmere sweater. I wanted to look like a man of quiet, respectable wealth, a man who was comfortable but not flashy, a man they could believe was happily retired and ready to open his wallet for his only son's happiness. But my most important preparation was internal. I had to lock away the cold, calculating strategist and become for a few hours the man they believed I was, a lonely old widower, slightly remorseful for his initial hesitation and now eager to make amends. I had to find a way to smile at them without letting the contempt show in my eyes. When I arrived at Serafina Gardens, I understood immediately why it cost so much. It was less a venue and more a private kingdom. Manicured lawns swept down to a shimmering lake. Fountains sculpted from Italian marble graced the entrance. I was met by a valet who looked like a model and a hostess who spoke in a reverent whisper. She led me through a grand ballroom with soaring ceilings and crystal chandeliers to a private tasting room. And there they were. The happy couple. Marcus was standing awkwardly by the window, looking out of place in a designer blazer that was too tight in the shoulders. Brittany, however, was in her element. She was holding court with the wedding planner, a severe-looking woman with a clipboard, and a tall, impeccably dressed man who I presumed was the head chef. Standing next to Brittany, looking like a slightly older, more brittle version of her, was a woman I recognized from photographs, her mother Carol. Brittany rushed over to me the moment I entered, her smile, a dazzling display of perfectly white teeth. "Silas, you made it. We're so glad you could come." She kissed the air next to my cheek. It smelled of expensive perfume and ambition. "You remember my mother, Carol?" she said. Carol gave me a thin, appraising smile and extended a limp hand. "A pleasure to finally meet the man behind the magic," she said, her eyes flicking over my simple sweater with a hint of disdain. "Brittany has told me all about your generosity." "The pleasure is all mine, Carol," I said, my voice warm and gentle. I took her hand with just the right amount of fatherly firmness. "You must be so incredibly proud of your daughter. She has impeccable taste." The compliment landed perfectly. Carol's smile thawed by a few degrees. I turned to my son. "Marcus." I placed a hand on his shoulder and squeezed it gently. "You look well." "Hey, Dad," he said, the relief on his face palpable. He was glad I was there, glad I was playing along. It absolved him of his guilt. "Thanks for coming." "I wouldn't miss it," I said, looking from him to Brittany. "I'm proud of you, son. You've chosen a wonderful partner." The performance had begun. The chef, whose name was Jean-Pierre, began the presentation. It was a parade of culinary absurdity. We were served tiny, jewel-like appetizers on oversized spoons. Deconstructed salads served in glass globes. Main courses with foams, gels, and essences. With each dish, Jean-Pierre would deliver a breathless monologue about the ingredients, their origin, their philosophical significance. Brittany and her mother would listen with rapt attention, making grand pronouncements. "Oh, the yuzu foam is divine, but does it perhaps clash with the micro cilantro?" Carol would muse. "I absolutely agree, Mother," Brittany would say. "Chef, could we perhaps explore a fennel dust instead?" Marcus just nodded along, chewing thoughtfully and saying things like, "Wow, that's really good." I played my part to perfection. I ate slowly, thoughtfully. I complimented the chef on his artistry. I asked Brittany to explain the flavor profiles to me, making her the expert. "My dear, you have such a sophisticated palate," I'd say. "What do you think of the quail egg?" With every compliment, I could feel her relaxing, her confidence growing. She was no longer just the fiancée. In her mind, she was the gracious hostess, the matriarch in training, and I was her adoring and obedient subject. My internal monologue, however, was running a very different script. As I tasted a tiny scallop that cost more than a full bag of groceries, I thought, "This tastes like nothing. It tastes like burning money." While I smiled and nodded at Carol's pontificating about wine pairings, I thought, these people are so starved for meaning they have to invent it in their food. The main courses arrived, a choice between a filet mignon resting on a potato pave or a pan-seared sea bass with a saffron risotto. As we ate, I decided it was time for the centerpiece of my performance. "If you'll indulge me for a moment," I said, my voice soft. The table fell quiet. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a long, velvet-covered box. I slid it across the table to Brittany. Her eyes widened. "Silas, what is this?" "It's a welcome gift," I said, my voice filled with a carefully practiced sincerity. I know I was hesitant at first. Change is difficult for an old man, and for that I am truly sorry. I was wrong. I see now how happy you make my son, and I want to welcome you to the Blackwood family, properly." Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of white satin, was a diamond tennis bracelet. It was elegant, expensive, and just the right amount of flashy. It was a piece of jewelry I had chosen with meticulous care, the same way a hunter chooses the right lure. I had paid for it from my personal account, not the fund, a small, separate investment in their trust. A gasp escaped her lips. Her mother leaned in, her eyes gleaming. Marcus just stared, his mouth slightly agape. "Silas, it's beautiful," Brittany breathed, unable to take her eyes off the glittering diamonds. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I said, my smile warm and forgiving. "Just let an old man spoil his new daughter. May you wear it in health and happiness." She looked up at me, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something genuine in her eyes. It wasn't love or even affection. It was pure, unadulterated triumph. She had won. She had not only secured the money, but she had now received a tribute, a tangible symbol of my surrender. She thought the bracelet was her trophy. She had no idea it was her leash. She immediately held out her wrist for Marcus to fasten it. "Look, Mother," she said, angling her arm so the diamonds caught the light of the chandelier. "Isn't it perfect?" The rest of the tasting was a blur of happy chatter. My gift had shattered any remaining ice. I was no longer the reluctant father-in-law. I was a beloved patriarch, a generous benefactor to be celebrated. They talked about the wedding, about the honeymoon, about the life they were going to build, and I smiled and nodded and played my part, the ghost, at the feast, listening to them plan a future that I knew with absolute certainty was never going to happen. As I left the gardens an hour later, the valet brought my car around a respectable but modest 10-year-old Lincoln. It was parked next to Marcus's brand new Porsche, another gift from a time when I thought money could fix the growing distance between us. Brittany and her mother were still fawning over the bracelet as I said my goodbyes. I drove away with the taste of overpriced sea bass in my mouth and the cold, hard satisfaction of a job well done. The web was woven. The bait was taken. They were completely at ease, convinced they had tamed the old lion. They had no idea they had just invited him into the heart of their camp. The conversation flowed as smoothly as the expensive wine the sommelier was pouring a river of superficialities. We discussed the merits of Chilean sea bass versus Atlantic salmon, the precise shade of ivory for the tablecloths, and the optimal timing for the string quartet to switch from Vivaldi to something more contemporary. I listened more than I spoke, nodding and smiling, playing the part of the contented patriarch, an ancient benevolent turtle content to watch the younger, more vibrant creatures play. The main course was cleared, and the chef Jean-Pierre returned to present the dessert options. He unveiled a platter of miniature creations that looked more like sculptures than food. "And here," he said, gesturing with a flourish to a delicate tower of sponge sugar, "we have the croquembouche, a traditional French celebratory dessert. It is a monument, a testament to the heights that love can build." Brittany clapped her hands together lightly, her new diamond bracelet catching the light of the chandelier. "Oh, it's divine, chef," she said. "A monument. I love that. Isn't this whole place just a monument, Silas? It must have cost a fortune to build." Her question was casual, a simple observation, but it was the opening I had been waiting for all afternoon. It was the perfect, gentle slope that would lead them exactly where I wanted them to go. I let a slow, nostalgic smile spread across my face. I looked around the opulent room at the hand-carved mahogany walls and the soaring, vaulted ceiling. "It is a beautiful place," I said, my voice soft as if speaking from a great distance. "It reminds me in a strange way of the first house Sarah and I ever built." A polite silence fell over the table. They were expecting a short, simple comment. I was about to give them a history lesson. "It wasn't a grand place like this." I began, my gaze drifting towards the window. It was a tiny little bungalow on the south side of town on a piece of land nobody wanted, all red clay and scraggly pine trees. We bought it with every last penny we had saved up from our day jobs. For a full year, we didn't have a piece of furniture that wasn't a hand-me-down or something I'd built myself from scrap. I paused, taking a sip of water, letting the image settle in their minds. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He had heard this story before. Brittany and her mother exchanged a quick, almost imperceptible glance. This was not the kind of conversation they were used to. "We didn't have the money for a construction crew," I continued, my voice even and warm. "So we built it ourselves. Every evening after our real jobs and every single weekend for 14 months. I did the framing, the plumbing, the electrical, and Sarah did everything else." I'll never forget this sight of her, a woman who looked as elegant in a ballroom as she did in blue jeans, mixing concrete in a wheelbarrow until her hands were raw and blistered. She never complained. Not once. I looked directly at Marcus. She'd be out there with me in the summer heat and the winter rain, holding boards steady, handing me nails. And every night we'd sit on the unfinished subfloor sharing a thermos of coffee, and we'd just look at what we'd built that day. We'd talk about the future, about the family we wanted to have in those rooms. The story was true. Every word of it was a sacred memory. But as I spoke, I could feel myself weaponizing it, polishing each detail not for sentiment but for impact. I was using the ghost of my wife, and the thought was both shameful and necessary. Every nail we hammered wasn't just a nail, I said, my voice growing stronger. It was a promise. Every board we raised wasn't just a piece of wood, it was a piece of our future, a future we were building with our own hands. We didn't have much money back then. In fact, we were probably poorer than anyone in this room could possibly imagine. I let my eyes sweep across the table, across their designer clothes and expensive jewelry. But sitting there on that dusty floor, looking at the stars through the open rafters, we felt like the richest people on earth, because we learned something profound in that little house. We learned that the real value of a thing isn't what it costs. It's what you put into it. The sweat, the sacrifice, the love. That's the stuff that lasts. That's the real foundation. I finished my story and took another sip of wine, letting the silence hang heavy in the air. The trap was laid. Now I just had to watch how they walked into it. Marcus was the first to speak, his voice thick with the discomfort he was trying to hide. "Yeah, Dad," he mumbled, refusing to meet my eyes. You guys worked really hard." He felt it. He felt the weight of the story, the gentle but unmistakable rebuke it carried. He knew what I was really talking about. Carol Brittany's mother gave a polite, tight-lipped smile. "Well, that is just a wonderful story, Silas," she said, her tone dripping with the condescension of the privileged. "A real testament to the American dream. It's just so lovely that Marcus and Brittany won't have to struggle like that. They can start their life together on the right foot." She had completely, utterly missed the point. She had heard a story about poverty and hard work, and her only takeaway was that her daughter was lucky enough to avoid it. She saw our struggle not as a character-building journey, but as an unfortunate hardship to be bypassed with someone else's money. Then it was Brittany's turn. I watched her closely. She placed her hand on mine, her touch light and dismissive. She gave me a patient, pitying smile, the kind you might give a charming old grandfather who has started to repeat his stories. "Oh, Silas," she said, her voice soft and patronizing. "That is so rustic. You and Sarah were so resourceful. It's like something out of a movie." Rustic. That was the word she chose for my life's work, for my wife's sacrifice. Not inspiring, not powerful, rustic. A charming anecdote from a bygone era, as relevant to her modern life as a horse and buggy. And then, without missing a beat, she proved she hadn't understood a single word. She turned her dazzling smile to the chef, who had been standing by silently. "Speaking of building," she said, her voice bright and commanding again, "Chef Jean-Pierre, about that croquembouche? I was thinking, could we encase it in a spun sugar birdcage as a sort of architectural element? I think the symbolism would be just breathtaking, don't you?" And just like that, the moment was over. The conversation shifted back to the price of sugar and the structural integrity of desserts. My heartfelt story, my weaponized memory, had been brushed aside as easily as a breadcrumb on a tablecloth. I looked at their faces, alive with the thrill of planning their perfect hollow spectacle. I saw Marcus's relief at the change of subject. I saw Carol's smug satisfaction. And I saw Brittany's complete, unbreachable self-absorption. In that moment, watching her discuss the symbolism of a sugar cage, any lingering doubt I had about the necessity of my plan vanished. Any fatherly instinct to protect my son from the consequences of his own choices died. They were incapable of understanding the lesson if it was spoken. They would have to learn it through the unforgiving language of collapse. It was the night before the rehearsal dinner. The final act was set to begin. In less than 24 hours, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the final payments for the wedding were due. If they were not paid, the first domino would fall. The entire elaborate structure they had so proudly built would begin to tremble. Charlie had called me earlier in the day to confirm. "Are we green-lit for tomorrow, Silas?" he had asked, his voice all business. "The final invoices are all queued up. All I need is your final authorization to withhold payment." I told him I would call him back that evening. There was one last thing I had to do. It was not part of the plan. It was not a strategic move. It was a final, foolish act of fatherhood. I was in my workshop, the place where the whole sorry saga had begun. The lights were off save for the single lamp above my workbench. I was holding the small hammer I had made for Marcus when he was a boy, the one with his initial burned into the handle. I ran my thumb over the smooth, worn wood. I had to give him one last chance, one final open door. I had to do it for me. I had to do it for Sarah's memory. I had to know with absolute certainty that the path I was on was the only one left to take. I pulled out my phone and dialed his number. He answered on the third ring, his voice breathless and distracted, the sound of a loud celebratory dinner in the background. "Dad, hey, can I call you back? We're in the middle of the rehearsal dinner toast right now." "It will only take a moment, Marcus," I said, my voice quiet but firm, cutting through the noise on his end. "Just step outside for a second." I heard him sigh with annoyance, then the sounds of the party faded as he presumably moved to a quieter location. "Okay, I'm here," he said, his voice impatient. "What is it? Is everything okay with the fund?" The fund. That was his first thought. Not about me, not about us, but about the money. "The fund is fine, Marcus," I said. "This isn't about that. I just have one question for you, son. Before everything happens tomorrow, before the wedding." "Okay," he said, drawing the word out wary. I took a deep breath. "Look around you," I said softly. "At the restaurant, at Brittany, at the life you're about to step into. I just want you to tell me honestly from your heart. Are you happy? Is this truly what you want?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. For a split second, I allowed myself to hope. In that silence, I heard the faint echo of the boy I had raised, the boy who loved fishing with his dad and working on old cars. I could feel his hesitation, a crack in the polished facade he had built around himself. He could say no. He could say he was scared. He could say he had made a mistake. The door was wide open. What do you mean, Dad?" he asked, his voice suddenly small, uncertain. He was there. The real Marcus was there just for a moment. But then I heard a sharp female voice in the background, muffled but clear. "Who is it, honey? Is that your father again? What does he want now? Tell him we're busy." It was Brittany. Her voice was the whip that snapped him back into line. I heard him clear his throat, and when he spoke again, the vulnerability was gone, replaced by a cold, rehearsed defensiveness. He had heard my question not as an offer of help, but as an attack on his choices. "You know what, Dad?" he said, his voice hard. "Yes, I am happy. This is what I want. This is the life I'm choosing for myself. Brittany is amazing, this wedding is amazing, and this is the start of my real life." He took a breath, his anger building. "I don't know why you're calling me now, trying to make me feel guilty or whatever this is. You made your choice to be difficult at the beginning, and now you're trying to ruin this for me too." "That was not my intention, son," I said, my own voice now hollow, the last ember of hope extinguished. "I see," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Well, let me make it very clear for you so there are no more last-minute questions. This is my life, my choice." He paused and then delivered the final fatal blow. "This is my wedding, Dad, not yours." The words hung in the air, a final, definitive severing of the bond between us. He had made his choice. He had chosen the performance over the person, the illusion over the truth. He had closed the last door himself and locked it from the inside. "I understand," I said, and my voice was calm, empty. There was nothing left to feel. I just had to ask. "Good night, Marcus." I ended the call before he could say another word. I placed the phone on the workbench and looked down at the little hammer in my hand. I had my answer. The father in me could finally rest, knowing he had done all he could. Now the builder had to finish the job. I picked up the phone one last time. I dialed Charlie. He answered immediately. "Silas." "Charlie." I said, my voice clear and steady as a steel beam. "It's time. Withhold the final payments." The day of the wedding arrived, a perfect, sun-drenched Saturday in early June. In her final act of magnanimous victory, Brittany had called me 2 days prior. "Silas," she had said, her voice dripping with the syrupy condescension of a queen inviting a stable boy to a royal feast. "Marcus and I have been talking, and we've decided that we'd like you to be there after all, just to witness it. It feels right. No need for a speech or anything, of course. Just find a seat in the back. Consider it our final gift to you." A gift. She was allowing me to witness the triumphant culmination of my own fleecing and calling it a gift. I accepted with quiet, humble gratitude. I was not a guest. I was a ghost invited to haunt my own legacy. When I arrived at the Serafina Gardens, the scale of their fantasy was breathtaking. Valets in crisp white uniforms sprinted to handle a seemingly endless line of gleaming German luxury cars. The air itself felt different here, perfumed with the scent of 1,000 imported orchids and the quiet hum of immense wealth. I walked through the grand entrance, my simple dark suit feeling like a foreign costume. I was a stranger in the house that I had built. The grand ballroom where the reception would be held was a masterpiece of ostentatious beauty. The $60,000 jazz band Velvet Fusion was already playing their smooth, effortless music, a soundtrack for the afternoon's performance. Massive cascading floral arrangements bursting with the rare Hawaiian orchids I had paid for seemed to drip from the ceiling. In the center of the terrace, the $10,000 ice sculpture of two swans already had tiny beads of sweat glistening on its wings, a beautiful thing already beginning to die under the Georgia sun. I knew almost no one. The crowd was a sea of unfamiliar faces, a curated collection of Atlanta's new and old money. These were not our friends, not the people Sarah and I had shared barbecues and birthdays with. These were Brittany's people, the audience for whom this entire production had been staged. I saw her mother Carol gliding through the crowd, a champagne flute held aloft like a scepter. She was accepting compliments on her daughter's behalf, her smile tight and proprietary. She was not the mother of the bride. She was the producer of a hit show. I found a small, discreet table in the back of the garden where the ceremony was to take place near a large oak tree that offered some shade. From here, I had a perfect view of the stage. And then I saw them. My son Marcus looked handsome in his custom-tailored tuxedo, but he also looked like a stranger. There was a stiffness in his posture, a practiced smile on his face. He looked like an actor playing the part of a groom constantly glancing towards his co-star for his cues. He was a prop in his own wedding. But Brittany was incandescent. She was the star, the director, and the writer of this entire production. Her dress, a confection of silk and lace that I knew had cost more than my first 2 houses combined, was magnificent. But it was her face that held my attention. She was radiant with a kind of triumphant, predatory bliss. This was not the nervous joy of a bride in love. This was the unshakable confidence of a conqueror on her coronation day. She moved through the crowd, her hand resting possessively on Marcus's arm, soaking in the envy and admiration of her guests. Her victory was total. The ceremony began at precisely 4 o'clock. The music swelled. Brittany walked down the aisle, a vision of flawless, expensive perfection. Marcus watched her, his face a mask of adoration. They met under a massive archway woven from thousands of white orchids, the Atlanta sun filtering through the petals. The officiant, a man with a smooth, reassuring voice, began to speak. He spoke of love, of partnership, of trust. He talked about the importance of building a strong foundation for the future. The irony was so thick, I could have choked on it. I looked down at my watch. It was 4:30. Charlie's final instructions echoed in my mind. The wire transfers for the final payments are all queued up, Silas. All of them are scheduled to go through at 4:59 p.m. All it takes is a single confirming text from you. If I don't receive that text by 4:55 p.m., the system automatically cancels every single transaction. I listened as they exchanged their vows. They had written their own, of course. Brittany spoke of Marcus's kind and generous spirit. Marcus spoke of Brittany's vision and strength. They were not vows. They were press releases, carefully crafted statements designed to reinforce their public image. They were 2 corporations announcing a merger. Then came the rings, the exchange of gold and diamonds, the final binding contract. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the officiant declared. The crowd erupted in a roar of polite, enthusiastic applause. Marcus and Brittany kissed a long cinematic kiss for the cameras. It was a perfect moment, a flawless scene, the triumphant couple, the adoring crowd, the beautiful setting. They were married. They believed they had secured their future, that they had won the grand prize. They turned and walked back down the aisle, beaming, laughing, untouchable. As they passed, their eyes swept the crowd, but they didn't see me. I was just part of the scenery, an old man in the shadows. They were already looking ahead towards the magnificent party that awaited them, towards the honeymoon in their presidential villa, towards the life of effortless luxury they had so cleverly secured. I looked at my watch again. It was 4:48 p.m. My thumb hovered over my phone, over the single pre-written text message to Charlie. It contained only one word: execute. They had their perfect moment. They had their flawless ceremony. They had their adoring crowd. They believed they had the rest of their lives. They had no idea their new life had an expiration time, and it was just 7 minutes away. The cocktail hour began. The guests, buzzing with the happy energy of the ceremony, flowed from the sun-drenched garden onto the vast marble terrace overlooking the lake. The atmosphere was one of effortless elegance. Waitstaff in black bow ties moved silently through the crowd, carrying silver trays laden with champagne flutes and the $17,000 oysters. The jazz band Velvet Fusion played a smooth, sophisticated melody that was the perfect soundtrack for the quiet clinking of glasses and the murmur of expensive conversations. Marcus and Brittany stood at the center of it all, a king and queen in their newly conquered court. They were luminous, untouchable. Guests swirled around them, offering congratulations, air kisses, and envious compliments. Brittany, the ceremony was a dream, straight out of a fairy tale. Marcus, my boy, you've done well for yourself. She's a keeper. Every word of praise was a confirmation of their success, a validation of their vision. I watched them from my secluded table in the back. I saw the way Brittany's smile never quite reached her eyes, how it was a performance of joy rather than the real thing. I saw how Marcus kept glancing at her, seeking approval, his own happiness contingent on hers. They were not a couple, they were a brand, and this was their triumphant launch party. The wedding planner, a woman named Genevieve, who radiated an aura of terrifying efficiency, stepped up to a small podium near the band. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced. Her voice amplified just enough to cut through the chatter. "If I could have your attention, please. It is now time for our traditional toasts to the happy couple." The crowd quieted. The father of the bride, a man named Dennis, who looked permanently bewildered, was first. He gave a short, rambling speech about his little girl, fumbled with his notes, and ended with a slightly inappropriate joke that fell flat. The crowd clapped politely. Next was the best man, Chad, the friend I had imagined at the rooftop bar. His speech was a predictable montage of college drinking stories and locker room humor, thinly veiled as a tribute to his bro. He ended by raising his glass. "To Marcus and Brittany May, your life together be as rich and beautiful as this incredible party." The crowd cheered. Genevieve, the planner, stepped back to the podium, her smile fixed and professional. "Thank you, Chad. And now, before the bride and groom have their first dance, I'd like to—" She never got to finish her sentence. Because at that moment I pushed my chair back, the sound of its legs scraping on the marble, a small sharp tear in the fabric of the afternoon. I stood up, and I began to walk toward the podium. A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. Who was this old man in the simple suit? The music faltered for a moment. I saw Genevieve's eyes widen in alarm. This was an unscheduled event, an unwelcome deviation from her meticulous timeline. She started to move to intercept me, but I gave her a calm, steady look that seemed to freeze her in place. I saw Marcus's face, a mask of confusion and dawning horror. I saw Brittany's smile tighten, a flicker of pure fury in her eyes. I reached the podium. I didn't grab the microphone, but gently took it from its stand. I turned to face the crowd of 300 polished, wealthy strangers. The silence was now absolute, thick with tension and curiosity. "Good afternoon," I said, my voice quiet, calm, and perfectly clear in the sudden stillness. It was the voice of a builder, a man used to giving orders on a loud construction site, a voice that carried without shouting. "My name is Silas Blackwood. I am the father of the groom." A polite, scattered applause broke out. I let it die down. "I want to thank you all for coming here today to celebrate this momentous occasion." I began, letting my eyes sweep across the crowd before they settled on the bride and groom. They were standing frozen near the dance floor, their smiles gone, replaced by identical masks of wary apprehension. "Genevieve, you and your team have done a remarkable job. The gardens are breathtaking, the food is art, and the band, well, the band is worth every single penny." This drew a few chuckles. The tension eased slightly. They thought I was just a proud, slightly awkward father. "Many of you may be wondering why I wasn't introduced," I continued, my tone still gentle. "And some of you may know that until very recently I wasn't even supposed to be here today. You see, my son and his new wife made the difficult decision to ban me from their wedding." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Murmurs erupted like wildfire. I saw people leaning in to whisper to each other. I saw Carol Brittany's mother, her face turning a pale shade of gray. I kept my eyes locked on Marcus and Brittany. Their faces had gone from wary to utterly horrified. Their perfect image was cracking. "It's true," I said, holding up a hand to quiet the crowd. And I understood. As Brittany explained to me, it was to be an event for a different generation, and I accepted that. But they were still kind enough to find a way for me to contribute to their special day. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. A few months ago, I received a package, not an invitation, but a professional proposal. It was an invoice for the estimated cost of this wedding and their 3-week honeymoon in a presidential villa in Bora Bora. The grand total, I said, my voice dropping slightly, was $390,000. The silence that followed was a physical thing. It was a silence of pure, unadulterated shock. $300,000 was a lot of money even for this crowd, but the act of sending a father a bill for a wedding he was banned from, that was a story they would be telling for years. I saw a woman in the front row actually cover her mouth with her hand. Chad, the best man, was just staring at Marcus, his jaw slack. The mask on Marcus's face had crumbled completely. He was pale, sweating, his eyes darting around as if looking for an escape. Brittany was rigid, her face a kabuki mask of rage, her knuckles white as she gripped Marcus's arm. The invoice came with a lovely handwritten note from Brittany. I went on, my voice still as calm as a frozen lake. It said, and I quote, "Please consider this your gift to our happiness. We know you'll want to do the right thing." And she was right. I did want to do the right thing. As a father, I wanted to give my son and his new wife a gift. A wedding gift that would truly honor the memory of his mother, Sarah. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small remote control. I clicked a button. Behind the band, a massive white screen, which had been discreetly set up for a wedding slideshow, hummed to life. "My wife Sarah and I said, my voice now filled with a genuine warmth. "We built our business, Blackwood and Sons, from nothing. We believed in the value of hard work, integrity, and giving back to the community that supported us. We believed that a legacy isn't what you own, it's what you build for others." In that spirit and in her honor, my first wedding gift to the happy couple was to take that entire sum, every single dollar they asked for, and do something truly beautiful with it. The screen behind me flickered, and then a high-resolution image appeared. It was an official notarized certificate of donation. The crowd fell silent as they read the words. "I am proud to announce," I said, my voice ringing with a strength and clarity that surprised even me, "the creation of the Sarah Blackwood Legacy Scholarship Fund, a permanent endowment to provide full 4-year college scholarships to underprivileged, high-achieving students from right here in Atlanta who wish to pursue degrees in engineering, architecture, and construction management. The initial endowment," I said, pointing to the certificate on the screen, "was a one-time irrevocable donation of $527,850. I let the number sink in. The final inflated total of their greed. For a moment, no one moved. And then something unexpected happened. An old man in the front, someone I didn't know, began to clap. Then another person joined, and another. Soon, the entire garden was filled with a roar of spontaneous, genuine applause. They were clapping for Sarah. They were clapping for the scholarships. They were clapping for the sheer audacious rightness of the act. Through the applause, I saw Brittany's face. If looks could kill, I would have been a pile of ash on the marble floor. Her beautiful, triumphant mask had been ripped away, revealing the raw, ugly face of pure fury beneath. Marcus looked like he was going to be physically sick. I held up my hand again, and the applause slowly died down. "Thank you," I said. "Thank you." But that was only my first gift. I turned my body slightly to face my son and his bride directly. "My second gift," I said, my voice losing its warmth and becoming as cold and hard as granite, "is a lesson in business. A lesson my wife and I tried to teach our son, but one it seems he failed to learn. A lesson about the importance of reading the fine print." I saw Charlie, my old friend, standing discreetly near the edge of the terrace. He gave me a slow, almost imperceptible nod. At the same moment, 2 men in sharp black suits, the venue manager and his head of security, began to walk calmly but purposefully from the main building toward the stage. "You see," I explained to the silent, captivated crowd, "when I agreed to fund this wedding, I did so through a formal trust managed by my lawyer. Every vendor contract for every single flower, every oyster, and every musical note you have enjoyed this afternoon was reviewed and amended by my legal team before my son signed them. I saw a flicker of panic in Marcus's eyes. For the first time, the memory of those unread documents seemed to surface. As I just explained, I continued, the entire fund was liquidated this morning to create the scholarship, which means, of course, that no money was left to make the final payments to the vendors. And according to the contracts, those final payments were due, let's see, I said, glancing at my watch, at 5 o'clock today, which was 22 minutes ago. The venue manager and his security head had now reached the edge of the dance floor. They stood there silent and imposing. According to Clause 2B of the venue contract which my son signed, failure to remit final payment results in the immediate and irrevocable termination of all services. It also gives the venue the legal right to ask all guests to vacate the premises immediately to avoid trespassing charges. A wave of shock and disbelief rolled through the crowd. People started to stand up, looking around in confusion. The members of Velvet Fusion had stopped playing their instruments, held in stunned silence. And finally, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, though it carried across the entire garden. According to Clause 2A of every single one of those contracts, the personal liability covenant, in the event the fund was unable to provide payment, the full financial responsibility for all outstanding balances reverts solely to the signatory of the contract. I looked directly at my son, the man who stood in my son's place. The color had drained from his face. He was swaying on his feet. Brittany was clutching his arm, her knuckles white, her face a mask of disbelief and horror. So, Marcus, I said, delivering the final killing blow, my last gift to you on your wedding day is a lesson in personal responsibility. As of 5 o'clock this evening, you are no longer the host of a lavish party. You are simply a man who is personally and legally in debt to the fine people who provided these services to the tune of $285,000. Good luck to you, son. You're going to need it. I placed the microphone carefully back in its stand. I turned without looking at them again and began to walk away. And as I did, the perfect, beautiful illusion they had spent $500,000 to create shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. The spell was broken. Chaos erupted. My final words fell into a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight. The soft jazz music had died. The light chatter was gone. The only sounds were the gentle splashing of the marble fountains and the distant hum of the city. For a long moment, nobody moved. The entire party of 300 guests was frozen in a tableau of collective shock, their champagne flutes held halfway to their lips, their eyes wide. The massive screen behind the now empty stage was the new centerpiece of the event. It glowed with the undeniable official proof of my donation to the scholarship fund, the huge $500,000 number, a silent testament to the scale of the deception and the totality of the reversal. It was not just a certificate, it was a tombstone marking the death of a dream. Then the spell was broken. The venue manager, a tall, impeccably dressed man named Mr. Dubois, stepped calmly to the podium. He took the microphone with an air of practiced, regretful authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice calm and firm, carrying across the stunned silence. "My name is Jean-Luc Dubois, and I am the general manager of the Serafina Gardens. I must regretfully confirm that what Mr. Blackwood has stated is correct. A material breach of contract has occurred due to non-payment of the final balance." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. This was real. This was actually happening. "As per the terms of the agreement signed by the client," Mr. Dubois continued, his voice devoid of emotion, "all services for this event are hereby terminated. I must now ask you all to please finish your drinks and make your way to the exit in an orderly fashion. Our staff will be on hand to assist you. You have 30 minutes before we will be legally required to consider your presence as trespassing." That was the signal. The activation. The perfect, beautiful picture shattered. The first reaction was not anger, but a frantic, hungry rush for information and drama. Cell phones appeared as if by magic. Hundreds of tiny screens were lifted, all pointing towards the center of the chaos, the bride and groom. This wasn't just a failed wedding anymore. It was content. It was the most incredible story these people would be able to tell for the next year. And then Brittany broke. The silence was shattered by a sound so raw and animalistic it made people flinch. It was a scream of pure, unadulterated rage torn from the very depths of her soul. "No!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. She turned on Marcus, her beautiful face twisted into a grotesque mask of fury. "You idiot! You weak, useless idiot! How could you let this happen? How could you let your senile old father do this to us? To me!" She began to hit him, her fist pounding against the chest of his expensive tuxedo. "Do something, fix it. Tell them he's lying." But Marcus couldn't fix it. He was a statue, a man hollowed out by shock. The color had drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, sickly gray. His eyes were wide and vacant, staring at the glowing screen as if he couldn't comprehend the words. The weight of the $500,000 debt, the public humiliation, the utter destruction of his carefully constructed world, it had all crashed down on him in a single brutal moment, and his mind had simply shut down. He didn't even seem to feel her blows. The vendors who had been hovering at the edges of the terrace saw their chance. The spell of decorum was broken. They began to close in their faces grim. The florist, the photographer, the leader of Velvet Fusion, they descended on the couple like wolves. "Where is our money?" the band leader demanded, his voice a low growl. "That contract has your name on it, son." "My orchids," the florist cried. "Who is paying for my orchids?" The scene devolved into a grotesque carnival. Guests were scrambling to leave, whispering excitedly into their phones. Brittany was screaming a hysterical, incoherent stream of threats and accusations. Marcus was catatonic, a silent, swaying statue in the eye of the hurricane, and the vendors were a circling pack of creditors, their polite professional masks ripped away to reveal the raw panic of people who had just been cheated out of a massive payday. Through it all, Charlie and I made our exit. No one noticed us. All eyes were on the spectacular implosion at the center of the terrace. We walked calmly, two old soldiers leaving a battlefield where the victory was total and absolute. As we reached the grand entrance, I took one last look back. I saw Brittany collapse onto the marble floor, her magnificent wedding dress pooling around her like a shroud, her sobs echoing across the now chaotic garden. I saw her mother Carol trying to pull her up her face, a mask of horror and shame. I saw the ice sculpture of the two swans now melting rapidly in the afternoon sun, its beautiful form slumping and disappearing, a perfect metaphor for the entire affair. And I saw my son still standing alone, a ghost at the ruins of his own life. I felt nothing. Not pity, not anger, not even satisfaction. I just felt quiet. The house had been demolished, the ground had been cleared, the foundation was gone, and now the long, slow work of rebuilding could begin. I turned my back on the chaos and walked away, the sounds of my son's ruined future fading behind me. The storm I had unleashed did not arrive with a single crashing wave. It began as a series of tremors, small localized earthquakes of chaos that quickly merged into a tsunami of social and financial ruin. As I walked away from the podium, the applause for the scholarship fund was still echoing a surreal soundtrack to the beginning of the end. But the applause was quickly being replaced by a frantic, excited buzzing. The guests these pillars of Atlanta society were not leaving. Of course they weren't. This was better than theater. This was a public execution, and they had front row seats. Everywhere I looked, the glow of a smartphone screen illuminated a face wrapped with delighted horror. They were filming. They were live tweeting. They were texting everyone they knew. The news of the Blackwood-Cunningham wedding disaster was already spreading through the city's elite circles before the first champagne flute had been abandoned. This public spectacle, the very thing Brittany had craved, was now being turned against her, her humiliation broadcast and preserved for eternity. I reached the shaded oak tree at the back of the garden, my pre-chosen observation post. Charlie was already there, leaning against the trunk, a grimly satisfied look on his face. "Well," he said, his voice a low rumble, "that was quite a speech." I didn't reply. I just watched. The first true tremor began when the venue manager, Mr. Dubois, made his announcement. The moment he confirmed my story and asked everyone to leave, the theoretical disaster became a real and present crisis. A woman in a large feathered hat let out a small shriek of indignation. "Leave, but we haven't even had the main course." Her complaint was a tiny comical spark that lit the fuse. Brittany's scream was the explosion. It was a sound that ripped through the polite atmosphere of the garden party. A jagged, ugly sound of an animal caught in a trap. It silenced everyone. All phones, all eyes swiveled to her. She launched herself at Marcus, her beautiful, expensive dress hindering her as she hammered at his chest with her fists. "You ruined everything," she wailed, her voice hoarse. "My dress, my reputation, my life, it's all ruined because of you and your pathetic old father." Marcus was still a ghost, his eyes vacant. He took the blows without flinching, without seeming to even notice. His mind had already left the scene. And then the second tremor hit. The vendors. They had been patient, but the manager's announcement was their signal. Chef Jean-Pierre, his tall white hat now looking like a battle helmet, was the first to move. He strode across the terrace, his face a thundercloud. "Monsieur Blackwood," he boomed, his French accent thick with menace as he got right in Marcus's face. "My oysters, my sea bass. Who is going to pay for my brigade's time? My reputation is on the line." He was quickly joined by the florist, a small bird-like woman who now looked like a hawk. "My orchids," she screeched, pointing a trembling finger at the magnificent arch behind them. "Flown in from Hawaii, do you have any idea what those cost?" The leader of Velvet Fusion, a man who had looked so cool and sophisticated just minutes before, shoved his way through the growing crowd. He held up a copy of his contract, our special addendum clearly visible. "I've got your signature right here, kid. That's a $60,000 signature. You gonna pay me in cash?" The chaos was escalating, feeding on itself. Brittany's parents, Carol and Dennis, finally sprang into action. They rushed to their daughter's side, but not to comfort her. They were there to join the attack. Carol grabbed Marcus by the arm, her painted nails digging into the fabric of his tuxedo. "What have you done to my daughter?" she hissed, her face a contorted mask of rage. "We trusted you. We thought you were from a good family. You're nothing but trash, a fraud." "You'd better fix this, son," Dennis stammered, his bewildered face now flushed with impotent anger. "You'd better make this right." The best man, Chad, and a few of Marcus's other friends tried to intervene, forming a protective, if ineffective, circle around him. "Hey, back off," Chad yelled at the band leader. "It's not his fault. It was the old man." "I don't care whose fault it is," the man snarled back. "I just care whose name is on this line right here. And it ain't the old man's." It was a beautiful, horrifying storm. Guests were now openly filming the confrontation, providing commentary as if it were a reality show. I heard one woman say to her friend, "Oh my God, Carol is going to have a stroke. And look at Brittany's dress, it's getting grass stains. This is epic." Security guards were now moving through the crowd, their voices polite but firm. "Sir, madam, this way, please. The event is over." The guests began to move, but slowly, reluctantly, their phones still held high, not wanting to miss a single moment of the implosion. Amidst it all, Marcus finally seemed to snap back to reality. The vacant look in his eyes was replaced by one of pure animal panic. He was surrounded, trapped. His bride was attacking him, her parents were screaming at him, and a mob of angry vendors was demanding money he did not have. He looked around wildly, his eyes finally landing on me standing 100 yards away in the calm shade of the oak tree. Our eyes met for a long, silent moment across the wreckage of his life. There was no anger in his gaze, just a bottomless, soul-shattering despair. He had finally understood. He finally saw the trap he had so eagerly walked into. Then he did the only thing he could do. He turned and ran. He stumbled away from the crowd, pushing past a startled security guard, and just ran. He ran across the perfect manicured lawn, his expensive shoes slipping on the grass. He ran without direction, without a destination, simply running away from the unbearable weight of the consequences he had signed his name to. Brittany watched him go, her screams dissolving into a choked, guttural sob. The fight went out of her. Her body sagged and she collapsed onto the grass, a ruined queen on a fallen throne. The vendors, their target now gone, were left shouting into the air, their anger turning to impotent frustration. Charlie put a hand on my shoulder. "It's done," he said quietly. "Let's go." We turned and walked away, melting into the departing crowd of guests. As we headed towards the exit, I overheard snippets of conversation that told me my work was complete. "Can you believe it? Banned him and then sent him the bill?" The scholarship fund was a brilliant move, absolute genius. Brittany Cunningham will never be able to show her face in this town again. "Did you get the video of her hitting him? Send it to me." My story was no longer my own. It had been unleashed, and it would now grow and spread and become a legend, a cautionary tale told over brunch tables and at country clubs for years to come. I had not just taken their money, I had taken their name, I had taken their reputation, I had taken the very foundation of the life they had tried to build, and I had given it all away to children who would actually build something real with it. We reached the valet stand. The chaos of the terrace was a distant, chaotic noise behind us. The line of luxury cars was long, the guests eager to leave the scene of the crime and begin the more important work of gossiping about it. I saw Dennis and Carol Brittany's parents arguing heatedly with the security guard. My modest Lincoln was brought around. Charlie and I got in. As we pulled away from the Serafina Gardens, I took one last look in the rearview mirror. I saw the grand entrance, the marble fountains, the manicured lawns. It all looked so perfect, so serene, a beautiful empty stage where a terrible necessary play had just reached its conclusion. The storm had passed. And now came the quiet work of dealing with the wreckage. The chaos on the terrace was a self-sustaining fire now feeding on the panic and humiliation. From our vantage point under the old oak tree, Charlie and I watched the final act of the tragedy play out. We saw Marcus run a desperate, stumbling flight from a reality he could no longer deny. We saw Brittany collapse, her magnificent dress, the symbol of her triumph, now just a silken shroud on the grass. The perfect picture was not just shattered, it had been burned, and its ashes were scattering in the wind. I had seen enough. The architect of the demolition does not need to stay to sift through the rubble. Charlie must have sensed the shift in me. He placed a heavy, steadying hand on my shoulder. "It's done, Silas," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Let's go home." I gave a single slow nod. There was nothing more to say. We turned our backs on the wreckage and began to walk. Our path took us along the manicured stone walkway that bordered the garden, a route that allowed us to bypass the worst of the implosion on the main terrace. Yet the sounds followed us. Brittany's ragged, hysterical sobs, the angry shouting voices of the vendors, the excited, gossiping chatter of the departing guests. The noise was a physical thing, a wave of human misery and schadenfreude that washed over the beautiful, tranquil gardens. We walked slowly, two old men moving with a deliberate pace that was a stark contrast to the frantic energy around us. We were not fleeing. We were retiring from the field, our work complete. As we walked, I overheard snippets of conversation from the guests hurrying past us to the valet. "Did you get the video of her hitting him? Send it to me. Can you believe the nerve sending his own father a bill? The old man is a legend, donated the whole $500,000 to a scholarship fund, an absolute savage. Carol Cunningham will never recover from this. Her daughter is a social pariah." My story was no longer my own. It had been unleashed, and it now belonged to them, to the city. It would be twisted and embellished, told and retold at 1,000 dinner parties and country club lunches. It would become a legend, a cautionary tale. I had not just orchestrated an event. I had created a myth. The myth of the father who bought his son's wedding and gave it away. As we neared the grand entrance, we saw the full extent of the social fallout. Brittany's parents, Carol and Dennis, were engaged in a vicious whispering argument near the marble fountains, their faces contorted with blame and shame. Dennis was gesturing wildly, his face flushed. Carol was hissing back at him, her carefully constructed poise utterly gone. They were not comforting each other. They were trying to assign blame, to find a way to distance themselves from the disaster their daughter had so eagerly embraced. We walked past them without a glance. They were no longer a part of my story. The valet stand was an island of chaos. The wealthy and the beautiful were now just an impatient, clamoring mob, all desperate to get their cars and flee the scene of the social crime of the century. They waved their tickets. They snapped their fingers, their politeness a thin veneer that had been completely stripped away by the thrill of the scandal. Charlie and I stood to the side, waiting patiently. My modest 10-year-old Lincoln was one of the last cars to be brought around. Its arrival amidst the Porsches and Bentleys was a quiet, final statement. It was a car that was paid for a car that was earned. It was a car with a solid foundation. We got in the familiar scent of old leather, a comforting anchor in the sea of turmoil. Charlie settled into the passenger seat with a weary sigh. He looked tired, but his eyes held a deep, unshakable satisfaction. We didn't speak. There was no need. In 60 years of friendship, we had learned that the most important conversations were often the silent ones. As I pulled out of the long circular driveway and onto the main road, I took one last look in the rearview mirror. I saw the grand, imposing entrance to the Serafina Gardens. I saw the guests still milling about, their forms silhouetted against the setting sun. I saw the beautiful facade of a place that for one afternoon had been the stage for a terrible, necessary play. I felt no joy. I felt no triumph. The roaring fire of my resolve had burned down, leaving behind not the warmth of victory, but the quiet gray embers of a profound and somber peace. I had lost my son. Perhaps I had lost him years ago and was only now admitting it to myself. But I had saved his mother's legacy. I had protected the name that she and I had built with our own two hands. I had taken the poisoned inheritance they tried to steal and turned it into 100 clean new beginnings for children who would understand its true worth. The battle was over, and in the quiet hum of the engine as we drove away into the evening, I felt the silence not as an absence but as a presence. It was the silence of a job well done, the silence of a debt finally paid, the silence of a long overdue peace. The road ahead was empty, and for the first time in a long time, so was my heart. The weeks following the wedding were silent. I did not reach out to Marcus, and he did not reach out to me. There was nothing to say. The storm I had unleashed had moved on, and now I could only wait and watch from a distance to see what, if anything, would be left in its wake. I did not have to seek out the news. It found me. The story of the wedding crash of the century, as one local society blogger dubbed it, was an irresistible feast for the city's gossip machine. It was everywhere. I first saw the full scope of it about 2 weeks after the event. I was sitting at my kitchen table drinking my morning coffee when Charlie sent me a link to an article in an online Atlanta magazine. The headline was sensational: "From heirs to outcasts inside the Blackwood wedding implosion that rocked Atlanta society." The article was accompanied by a grainy but clear cell phone picture of Brittany on the ground, her face twisted in a scream, her beautiful dress stained with grass. I read the article with a kind of detached clinical interest. It was all there recounted in breathless dramatic detail. The reporter had clearly spoken to dozens of the guests, all too happy to share their first-hand accounts. They described my speech, quoting parts of it almost verbatim. They described the manager's calm, brutal announcement. They described the chaos, the vendors descending Brittany's hysterical rage, and Marcus's desperate stumbling escape across the lawn. The viral videos shot by the guests had millions of views. The hashtags #WeddingCrash and #BlackwoodBlackout were trending for days. My private family tragedy had become public entertainment. The article then moved on to the financial and legal consequences. It detailed how a dozen of Atlanta's most high-end vendors, from Serafina Gardens to Velvet Fusion, had filed a joint lawsuit against Marcus Blackwood for breach of contract, seeking damages in excess of $300,000, a number that didn't even include their own legal fees. Marcus, the article stated, had been unreachable for comment. His brand-new Porsche had been quietly repossessed from the curb outside his condo. But the most devastating part of the article was about the social fallout. Brittany, it seemed, had become a pariah. Her friends were no longer speaking to her. The social invitations had dried up. She had been publicly and brutally cast out from the world she had tried so desperately to conquer. She had tried to control the narrative, giving an exclusive interview to one blogger where she painted herself as the victim of a cruel, manipulative old man. But it had backfired spectacularly. My donation to the scholarship fund had framed the story in a way she could not overcome. In the court of public opinion, I was the righteous patriarch, and she was the greedy gold digger who had gotten her just desserts. Charlie called me later that day. "Did you see it?" he asked. "I did," I said. "It's actually worse than the article says," he told me, a grim satisfaction in his voice. "I got a call this morning from a colleague who represents the caterer. Apparently the legal fallout has gone nuclear. Marcus and Brittany have turned on each other." "What do you mean?" I asked. "He's suing her for fraudulent misrepresentation, claiming she tricked him into signing the contracts, and she's countersuing him for emotional distress and damages to her reputation. It's a bloodbath, Silas. They're trying to financially destroy each other before the vendors get a chance to." I felt a pang of something, a distant echo of sadness for the boy who had once been my son. But it was fleeting. These were the consequences of his own choices, the final ugly act of a play he had co-written. "And there's more," Charlie said. "My source at the courthouse tells me that last Friday 2 separate bankruptcy petitions were filed, one from Marcus Blackwood and another from Brittany Cunningham. They've both been wiped out. The condo, which was in Marcus's name, is in foreclosure. The life they spent $500,000 of my money to build, it's all gone. Vanished in less than a month. So that was it. The final accounting. Their partnership, which had been based on a shared dream of unearned wealth and status, had dissolved the moment the money disappeared. Their love was not strong enough to survive a single encounter with reality. Without the protective shell of my money, they had turned on each other, two scorpions in a bottle. They're both trying to get out of the vendor lawsuit by claiming the other one was responsible, Charlie continued. But with Marcus's signature on every contract, his bankruptcy will only delay the inevitable. He's ruined his credit, his name, his future. It will take him a decade, maybe more, to recover from this, if he ever does. We were silent for a moment. The magnitude of the destruction was absolute. So what happens now? I asked. Now nothing, Charlie said. Our part is done. The machine we built has done its job. The vendors will fight over the scraps in bankruptcy court. Marcus and Brittany will tear each other apart with lawsuits that neither of them can afford. And you, my friend, are free. You are protected. The name of Blackwood, the real one, the one that belongs to the scholarship fund, is clean. I thanked him and hung up the phone. I looked out the window of my workshop. The sun was shining. The world was moving on. The storm had passed and the wreckage was being sorted out by lawyers and accountants. The story was over. Brittany's dream of a high society life was a smoldering ruin. And my son was a bankrupt, disgraced man, lost in a wilderness of his own making. The price of his lesson had been his entire world. I could only hope for his sake that he had learned something from it. I didn't hear from him for a month. In that time, the silence from his end was a blank canvas on which the world painted a vivid picture of his downfall. The news articles, the city gossip, the reports from Charlie, they all told a story of a life in a spectacular, uncontrolled demolition. I tried not to think of him. I returned to the quiet rhythm of my life, spending my days in the workshop, finding a familiar peace in the scent of cedar and the patient work of my hands. I was finishing the small jewelry box I had started weeks ago, the one that looked just like the first gift I ever gave to Sarah. I was sanding the final corner when my phone began to vibrate on the workbench, its harsh buzzing a violent intrusion into the quiet. I looked at the screen. The name displayed was Marcus. My first instinct was to ignore it. Our last conversation had been a final, definitive ending. What more was there to say? But a deeper instinct, the stubborn, foolish ghost of fatherhood, took over. I wiped the sawdust from my hands, took a deep, steadying breath, and answered the call. "Hello, Marcus," I said. The voice that came back was not one I recognized. It was the voice of a ghost, thin and ragged, stripped of all its former arrogance. It was the voice of a broken man. "Dad." He choked out the word, followed by a raw, desperate sob. "Dad, I'm so sorry." I didn't speak. I just listened. "I'm ruined." He wept, the words tumbling out in a torrent of self-pity and panic. "They're taking everything. The condo is gone. The lawyers, Brittany's lawyers, are saying it was all my fault. The vendors are garnishing wages I don't even have. I have nothing, Dad. Nothing. I'm staying on Chad's couch. I sold my watch, your watch, just to eat." He was rambling his story, a chaotic mosaic of his new bleak reality. He blamed Brittany, he blamed her parents, he blamed the vendors for being so aggressive. He blamed everyone but himself. "You have to help me, Dad," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "Please, I'm your son. You can't let this happen to me. Just a loan, just enough to get back on my feet. To pay the lawyers to make this go away." I listened patiently until his desperate, gasping monologue ran out of steam. The line was filled with the sound of his ragged breathing. My own voice, when I finally spoke, was calm and quiet, but as unyielding as the oak of my workbench. "I cannot help you with money, Marcus," I said. He let out a sound that was half scoff, half sob. "You can't or you won't. Both," I replied, my voice still even. "The money you are talking about, the money you feel you are entitled to, is no longer mine. It belongs to the Sarah Blackwood Legacy Scholarship Fund. It is in an irrevocable trust. Even if I wanted to, I could not touch it. It belongs to children who will understand its value, who will use it to build something real. But I'm your son." He cried, the old entitlement flaring for a moment. "That money was for me. No son," I said, my voice softening just a fraction. "That money was my mistake. My mistake was thinking I could give you a future. A future is not something that can be given. It must be built." "I know I messed up, Dad," he said, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "I know. I was stupid. I was weak. I let Brittany." I let her. She did not sign those contracts, Marcus, I said, my voice cutting through his excuses. You did. She did not ignore the warnings. You did. This is the consequences of your choices. But I've learned my lesson, he pleaded. I swear to you I have learned my lesson. Please, Dad, just this one last time. Help me. A lesson isn't learned until you live it, son. I said the words coming not from a place of anger but from a deep, sad clarity. I spent my entire life trying to give you a foundation. I gave you a name, an education, a home. But I see now that I made a critical error. I made it all too easy for you. I gave you the house, but I never made you learn how to build it. He was silent, just the sound of his quiet weeping on the line. The money is gone, Marcus, I said, delivering the final hard truth. It is not coming back. What you do now, that is entirely up to you. You are at rock bottom. There is no foundation left beneath your feet. But the ground there, son, is firm. For the first time in your life, you can start building something that is truly yours. How? He whispered. How am I supposed to do that? You get a job. I said the advice simple and ancient. A real job. The kind where you get your hands dirty. You find a cheap apartment. You sell whatever is left that isn't already gone, and you start paying your debts. $1 at a time. It may take you the rest of your life. You may never be rich again. But you will be a man who is building his own house, not squatting in his father's. That is the only advice I have left to give you. The silence that followed was long and heavy. He was waiting for me to change my mind to offer the bailout he so desperately wanted. But I had nothing left to give him but the truth. I have to go, son, I said gently. I wish you well. I truly do. Goodbye. I ended the call and placed the phone back on the bench. My hand was steady. My heart was quiet. I had performed the last and perhaps most difficult act of fatherhood. I had let him go. I had forced him to stand on his own 2 feet, even if it was in the middle of a wasteland he himself had created. Whether he would take that first step and start building or simply lie down in the rubble was a choice that no longer belonged to me. It was his and his alone. A year has passed. The seasons have turned, and the silence in my workshop has changed. It is no longer the heavy, grief-laden silence of a man alone with his memories. It has been replaced by a new, more vibrant quiet, punctuated by the scrape of sandpaper, the clean bite of a chisel into wood, and the sound of a young, eager voice asking questions. Like this, Mr. Blackwood? I looked down at the pair of hands guiding a small block plane along the edge of a pine board. They were young hands not yet marked by the calluses and scars of a lifetime of work, but they were steady and careful. Almost Leo, I said, my own hands gently guiding his. Don't force it. Let the tool do the work. Feel the grain of the wood. You're not fighting it. You're dancing with it. Leo, Charlie's grandson, a good-natured, lanky 15-year-old, nodded with a seriousness that always made me smile. He adjusted his grip and tried again. This time a perfect paper-thin shaving of wood curled up from the plane. His face broke into a wide grin. Whoa, I did it. You did, I confirmed, stepping back. See the difference? From a comfortable old armchair in the corner, a familiar gravelly voice chimed in. He's got a better teacher than I ever had, Charlie said, looking up from his newspaper. All my dad ever taught me was how to file a motion. There's a time for filing motions and a time for planting wood, I said, sharing a look with my old friend. A man should know how to do both. Leo comes to the workshop twice a week now. It started as a way for him to earn a little extra money helping me sweep up and organize. But he showed a genuine curiosity and innate respect for the tools and the craft, and I in turn discovered a deep, unexpected joy in teaching him. In passing on the simple, honest knowledge that had been the foundation of my own life. We were building a bookshelf together. It was for his bedroom, a simple, sturdy thing made of pine, but we were building it right, measuring twice, cutting once, ensuring every joint was flush and every surface was smooth. He was learning about the wood, about the tools, but I hoped he was learning something more. I hoped he was learning the quiet satisfaction of creating something real and useful with your own 2 hands, the kind of satisfaction that cannot be bought, only earned. The first recipients of the Sarah Blackwood Legacy Scholarship started their freshman year at Georgia Tech last month. I had met them all at a small luncheon Charlie and I hosted. 4 bright, determined young men and women, their eyes shining with a future they were ready to build for themselves. One of them, a brilliant young woman named Keisha, reminded me so much of a young Sarah, her mind sharp and her spirit full of a quiet, unshakable fire. Seeing their faces, hearing their dreams, I knew with a certainty that reached into my very soul that I had made the right choice. My legacy was not a single flawed heir. It was a forest, a whole generation of builders and thinkers who would go out and shape the world in ways I could never imagine. I have not heard from Marcus. After the final desperate phone call, he disappeared from my life. I hear whispers through Charlie, who still has contacts in the city's legal circles. I hear he is working a manual labor job somewhere out of state, paying off a mountain of debt that will shadow him for decades. I hear that Brittany married a much older, very wealthy man just 6 months after the wedding disaster, her ambition as resilient as it was ruthless. I no longer feel anger when I think of them. I just feel a great overarching sadness for the boy who got lost along the way. I pray that he has found the firm ground I told him about. I pray that somewhere he is learning how to build again. But his life is his own now. My job as his father is over. Leo finished planing the board and held it up for my inspection. "Is it ready, Mr. Blackwood?" I ran my hand along the edge. It was perfectly smooth, perfectly square. "It's perfect, son," I said. "Now let's cut the joints." The sun was setting, casting long, golden shafts of light through the workshop's high windows, illuminating the dancing dust motes. The sound of a handsaw biting into wood filled the quiet air. It was a good sound, a sound of creation, a sound of a new foundation being laid, one built not on a name or an inheritance, but on shared knowledge, mutual respect, and the simple, honest dignity of a job well done. The workshop was no longer a place of ghosts. It was a place of life, and I was at peace. Sometimes in the quiet of the evening after Leo has gone home and the scent of sawdust settles in the cool air, I find myself thinking about the word legacy. It's a word that gets thrown around a lot. People think it's about the money you leave behind the buildings with your name on them, the inheritance you pass down to your children. I once believed that too. I spent my life building a kingdom of assets and accounts, all with the intention of handing it to my son, a pre-built future he could simply step into. I see now that was the greatest failure of my life. I was so focused on giving him the finished house that I never taught him the value of the blueprints. I gave him the fruits of my labor, but I never showed him the calluses on my hands. I thought my love could be measured in the opportunities I provided, in the hardships I helped him avoid. But in protecting him from struggle, I robbed him of his strength. I insulated him from failure, and in doing so I made him fragile. I built a beautiful, sturdy house, but I raised a son who didn't know how to live in it, only how to sell it for parts. This whole painful public spectacle was not an act of revenge. I see that now. It was an act of construction. But this time I wasn't building a house of wood and stone. I was demolishing a foundation of lies to see if underneath it all there was something real left to build upon. I had to take everything away from my son, the money, the status, the future I had built for him, so that he might finally have a chance to build one for himself. It was the hardest thing I have ever had to do, and I will not know for many years if it was the right one. But as I stand here in this workshop Sarah and I built, watching a new generation learn the simple, honest lessons of the wood and the tools, I know this much is true. You cannot give someone a foundation. It must be earned. It must be built, one difficult choice, one honest day's work at a time. That is the only legacy that lasts. I spent a lifetime building things from concrete and steel, believing that my legacy was something I could leave behind for my son. But I learned that a true legacy isn't an inheritance. It's the values you instill. I was forced to demolish the life I built for my son so he could learn to build his own. True fatherhood isn't about paving your child's way with gold. It's about teaching them the value of laying the first stone themselves, even if it means letting them feel the full weight of it. I spent a lifetime building things from concrete and steel, believing that my legacy was something I could leave behind for my son, but I learned that a true legacy isn't an inheritance. It's the values you instill. I was forced to demolish the life I built for my son so he could learn to build his own. True fatherhood isn't about paving your child's way with gold. It's about teaching them the value of laying the first stone themselves, even if it means letting them feel the full weight of it. What do you think? Did I do the right thing, or was my lesson too harsh? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more like it, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for listening.